Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 183. That's PEP or Planet Extra podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, which you can see on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. until the election on ABC TV. Getting earlier and earlier. We're going to be the news soon, Dave. And 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube on the ABC News In-Depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll also find timestamps and show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we are likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PepChaz Dr. Dave. But if you want to contact me or Lockie the Lackey privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. The address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. But for now, let's hear from the man who never raised the stakes in inconsequential views. I'm talking, of course, about Dr. Pepper himself, Dr. David Smith. Hey, Dave.
Hey, everyone. I am Dr. David Smith. I'm an associate professor at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. But I do not speak for either of those institutions. And that especially applies to if we do any kind of endorsements of anything, right? If I say Trouble and Tricks kitty litter has the most tremendous clumping properties, that is not, the veterinary position of the University of Sydney or the foreign policy position of the US Studies Centre. Okay, so I speak for myself and myself alone on PEP.
So do not be fooled, especially don't be fooled when we get to the emails and correspondence about Trump Grift and some of the products that we'll be talking about.
That's right, because I endorse them all.
Yes,
I endorse them all.
But Sydney,
the United States Studies Centre and the University of Sydney do not.
Absolutely.
Yes.
For your information at home, we are recording this podcast on Friday, the 11th of October at 2:18 p.m. I'm getting closer and closer to up to date these days because of the presence of Lockie the Lucky, and I'm better slept as well. Thank you, Lockie the Lucky.
It's amazing.
Which means I now simply don't know what happened last night. But I know everything
happened last night.
Wow. That is great news. Well, something's going to happen here. We actually have an announcement, a little family announcement later on after the podcast. So Lockie's going to join us and he's going to make a little announcement. But so we're making news, even if the American election is not. But for now, Dave, what are you grateful for?
I don't recommend television very often, but I am going to recommend essentially the only show that I've watched over the last 2 years, which is The Righteous Gemstones.
Ah, okay.
Righteous Gemstones is terrific.
Yep.
So it's produced by Danny McBride, who did Eastbound and Down and some other things. It's about a very wealthy and successful family of evangelical ministers. It is incredibly funny. It's not a super realistic depiction of the evangelical world, but I mean, it's basically a cartoon.
Yeah, I don't think Danny McBride is a super realistic depiction of anything.
Yeah, no. But they get the material details really right. So it's a parody, but it's a really spot on parody. And it's fantastic. The music in it is great. The actors in it are really wonderful. I mean, you've got Danny McBride, you've got John Goodman, Walton Goggin, Adam Devine, but best of all is Edie Patterson, who plays Judy Gemstone, who I think is one of the greatest comic creations I've ever seen. So
wow.
If you haven't seen it and you have the means to watch it, I would highly recommend The Righteous Gemstones.
I've been watching, this wasn't my grateful, but every couple of years, like I said the other day, I was talking about Thirsty Merc I come back to every summer. every 18 months or 2 years, I come back to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is one of my favorite shows, at least of the last 15, 20 years.
Wow.
And you might recall when we were having the endless correspondence about comedy songs, I brought up Crazy Ex-Girlfriend as an example of great comedy songs. I could have kept on going, but I knew pretty much no one has heard of it. So
right.
I just didn't want to talk to myself. But I've been loving it the last week. There's like 157 songs, and they're all on YouTube.
Wow.
And I reckon at least 80 of them are just top quality.
Okay.
Such top quality. One day I might make you watch a few of them. Dave.
Okay, well,
Get you to
yes.
reevaluate comedy songs.
Okay, yeah, The Righteous Gemstones is full of great parody songs, like full-blown, really well-crafted parodies of Christian pop songs from various eras. I should specify there are 3 seasons. Each season revolves around some kind of incredibly incompetent criminality. So in the first season, it's a blackmail attempt.
Yep.
Second season, it's the Dixie Mafia. And third season, it's the world's dumbest right-wing militia. So, yeah, all good stuff.
I've only watched the first season. I really liked it. I'm definitely going to watch the next 2. What I'm grateful for, Dave, is I'm grateful for Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler is the moderate Republican representative for New York 17.
Mm-hmm.
And he's running against Mondaire Jones in this election, who has switched seats. He was in a different seat before. Now, Mike Lawler, for a Republican in New York, he's relatively popular. He's quite moderate, as I said. He likes to get stuff done, but no Republican is safe, at least in this seat. And so he's up against it. It's going to be tight. I think he's ahead just, but it's going to be very tight. And this could well be one of the key seats that determines who wins Congress. Pivotal seat. And unfortunately for Mike Lawler, he's been in the news recently for dressing up as Michael Jackson for Halloween when he was 20 years old.
No.
Back in 2006. Now, he said...
I was going to say, how long ago was this? Because I don't know how old he is. That's unfortunate. He's in the social media age by that point.
Exactly. And look, I'll give you all the facts and you can decide. You can be the judge, Dave.
Okay, yep.
He said that the costume was, quote, truly the sincerest form of flattery, a genuine homage to my musical hero since I was a little kid trying to moonwalk through my mum's kitchen. The ugly practice of blackface was the furthest thing from my mind, he said. Let me be clear, this is not that. I'm a student of history, and for anyone who takes offense to the photo, I'm sorry. All you can do is live and learn, he says. Should we see the photo?
Yes.
Let's see the photo. Here's the photo. Do you want to describe the photo, Dave?
No.
Because there's listeners here. Not everyone can see it.
Yeah. So that's Thriller era.
Yes. He's got the jacket on. He's got the Thriller jacket. He's in a pose of some kind.
He does not look anything like Michael Jackson at all.
No, he doesn't.
See, this is the thing. This is like when Justin Trudeau did blackface to dress up as Aladdin.
Yes.
Justin Trudeau just looks like Disney's Aladdin anyway. There was no need for blackface.
Yeah, he just needed a fez. That was it.
Similarly, Mike Lawler has darkened his face far beyond Michael Jackson of the Thriller era.
Yeah.
He would look more like Michael Jackson if he hadn't done blackface.
That is the irony of this.
Yes.
Yeah. He looks. I mean, it's not like black. It's kind of reddy brown, but it's definitely not Michael Jackson. I'll tell you that.
No.
He's got short hair. He's not even wearing a wig.
Yeah.
It's a bit lame. I mean, he definitely is pulling a Michael Jackson move, and I'm not talking about anything involving small children. I'm talking about just a dance move, right? But yeah, he's in trouble. There's no doubt that this is a trouble photo. Do we agree? This is a trouble photo?
We agree, yes.
Okay, all right, okay. But you can judge for yourself if you're watching it. You can decide if this is a trouble photo. This is not why I'm grateful.
That's what I'm trying to say.
The reason he's in my grateful is because when reading up on this story, I discovered 2 amazing things about Mike Lawler, which I want to share with you guys.
Okay.
And particularly about his love for Michael Jackson. He was not lying about his love for Michael Jackson.
Okay.
Let me read you one paragraph in the New York Times about Mike Lawler and his love for Michael Jackson. In 2005, as a high school senior, Mr. Lawler flew from New York to California to attend parts of Jackson's criminal trial. The pop star had been charged with molesting a 13-year-old boy at his Neverland Ranch. Randy Tarabarelli, Jackson biographer, helped get Mr. Lawler into the courtroom and recalled in his book that the young fan had been so disgusted by testimony against Jackson that he couldn't help but mutter something derogatory under his breath. Okay, so as a schoolboy,
holy shit,
he traveled across America from one side of America to the other to attend a child molestation trial of Michael Jackson.
I'm sure that 99% of peppers, like me, when they heard you say travel across America to attend, thought that the next word was going to be a Michael Jackson concert.
No. We're talking about a trial about him diddling kids. And somehow he got in there, he got into the trial, and he started sledging the people testifying against Jackson under his breath. That is amazing. What a story.
This man needs to stay in Congress.
He gets stuff done.
Yeah.
Yes. But there's more.
Fuck
There's
me.
more. There's more.
Yeah, okay.
Secondly,
Go on.
while researching this story, I stumbled across an old video from 2008, only 2 years after the said photo, of Mike Lawler dancing. And he's not kidding about learning to dance like Michael Jackson.
Okay.
I want to show you the highlights of this video. For those who are listening, just imagine Michael Jackson.
We win on election night. I have this victory dance I've been working on. It's almost perfected. I actually can dance, so it's like.
What I love about being part of Team Mascherino is that this is the A team. I feel all the time like we have the best and brightest people in the business. Everyone.
How about that?
Incredible.
And the thing that's best about that is that Mike Lawler is one of those, I mean, you can't tell now because he's aged into his face.
Yes.
But he's one of those prematurely aged dudes who's when he's 15 looks like he's 40.
Yes.
And he still looks like he's 40 because he is 40. But back then in that video, believe it or not, he was 28 then.
Wow.
And he looked like he was 40. That was an amazing treat, an unexpected treat, a delightful treat, Mike. I'm grateful. Thank you so much. Time for some... Few quickies off the top here. Mm-hmm. Unsurprisingly, we start with some Swamp Rat correspondence.
Swamp Rabbit.
Swamp Rabbit correspondence.
Yes.
Swamp Rabbit correspondence from President Matthew. President Matthew has to say, the President Jimmy Carter rabbit incident occurred on the 20th of April, 1979. So it was not during the election campaign.
Oh,
as
okay.
Speculated.
Yep.
President Matthew, of course, would know. He's been president. So
Yes.
I trust President Matthew.
There you go.
Polish correspondence, Dave. This was also always going to happen.
Okay, yes.
David has some advice for you, Dave.
Okay, yes.
David's advice is the trick with Polish pronunciation is to not be intimidated, Dr. Dave.
Okay.
And so he goes on to explain how to pronounce Jimmy Carter's NSA's name.
Yes.
The name which you didn't try to pronounce last week.
No, I did not.
Folded Paper also explained it, and I'm pretty confident that I can tell you it is pronounced Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Okay.
Zbigniew Brzezinski. One more time.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Wow.
So there we go.
Okay.
That, if you're wondering, that's how you pronounce it. Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Okay.
There we go. Debate correspondence. Lots of people were refereeing our dispute about whether Vance was strategizing to make the VP debate civil or whether it was because of the moderators. I'm not going to lie. Most people agree with me, Dave. But those comments are never fun. I don't enjoy comments where people agree with me.
Yep.
I enjoy comments where people tell me I'm an idiot.
Okay.
And so I'm going to read some of them.
Yep.
Marianne says, Chaz, I think you overestimate how convincing Vance is. Bullshit with correct syntax is still bullshit. ZG.
100% agreed.
Yeah, I thought you might. And you agree with this one as well.
Yeah.
ZG says, at this point, I think Chaz is watching a different JD Vance to everybody else. Vance is the least authentic and most slimy major US political candidate of the 21st century, and disingenuously going out of his way to try and show civility in his one debate does not change that. If it's a genuine change of heart and it continues past the election, then maybe there's reason to reconsider his integrity, but somehow I wouldn't put money on that.
Agreed.
I thought you might as well. Now, let me be very clear to Marianne and to ZG. I don't keep saying JD Vance has integrity or that he's an inspiration for the children of tomorrow. I don't say that. I don't say he's my personal hero. I don't say any of those things. I just say one thing, and I say it constantly, and that he is very smart. And I still think that. Even though I do agree, ZG, you do run a very effective line in Withering Fury. I enjoy it very much. I'm not commenting on his integrity. other than when I was talking about immigration, in which case I very much was commenting on his integrity. I'm just generally saying he's a smart guy, and you don't always see that in Congress, especially not this week. We're not going to go on about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her weather control hurricanes today, but just assume we inserted 10 minutes of me raving about that right there. I should say, by the way, Axios got a quote from a Vance advisor this week that also suggested that this was their strategy.
Right.
Now, obviously, they might be using hindsight here and post-spinning. But what they said was, we had an intentional strategy of not being overly adversarial and aggressive and jumping down Walls' throat on every little thing. It looks petty. Fundamentally, no one gives a shit about the VPs. JD knew instinctively that what would actually move the ball forward is creating the contrast between Trump's successes and Kamala's failures. And by the way, this is from me now. That was their quote. I might just note that this was exactly, in hindsight, I was thinking about this. This was exactly the same mode that Vance was in at the RNC convention. He basically just had the same personality that he put on then. So he seems to save this mode for when everyone's watching. I am conscious of, I don't want this to go too long, so I'm going to skip the in-person debate correspondence for now.
Okay.
Someone actually came up to me in the street and corresponded.
Wow.
It was both it was certainly a yardstick. It was interesting, and it was also a little scary. But another day. The most important vice presidential correspondence, though, comes from Ricky. Yeah. Ricky, this is what Ricky had to say. Just realised during the VP debates that JD Vance is the first person on a ticket to have facial hair in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I would love to see something about the changing face, excuse the pun, of presidential tickets and candidates. Now, I'm not going to give you a full history of beards, Ricky. But I'm going to give you something.
More's the pity.
I'll give you something. I'll tell you broadly, because I did look into this, that US presidents were clean-shaven until Abraham Lincoln. He grew a beard as president.
Yep.
And then it was the trend for a while, for about 50 years.
Yes.
And then they stopped. And the last president or VP to have any facial hair at any time in office, would you care to guess?
I mean, Theodore Roosevelt had a very impressive moustache. I'm just trying to remember whether anyone after him had any facial hair. Look, I can't think of anyone, but I don't have the clearest picture of what Warren Harding looks like.
Look, to be perfectly honest, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
You're doing pretty well. Roosevelt was definitely near the end of the facial hair era. And if you knew the actual answer, it would be weird because this was a pathetic, embarrassing display.
Yep.
From Harry Truman, who directly after the 1948 election, he let himself go for a little bit during his holidays. And he grew a goatee with a moustache.
Seriously.
But it is pathetic. I've got it right here. I'm going to show you, Dr. Dave, and those on YouTube. You can barely see it. It's basically me after 4 hours. It's a really, really poor effort.
Wow.
It's a disgrace, actually, to be honest.
It's what you'd expect from a man whose middle name is S.
S. Yes. But Truman actually beat the last nominee who had facial hair, which was Thomas Dewey, had a real moustache.
Yes, yeah.
In 1948. He's the last candidate of any kind to have facial hair before J.D. Vance.
Yep.
So that's 1948. The last president or VP, like successful president or VP with real facial hair at the time of their election was Charles Curtis. That was in 1928.
Yep.
He had a moustache.
Okay.
The last president elected with a moustache was William Taft in 1908.
Ah, yes.
So that's getting to Theodore Roosevelt territory. So he went far off. He was the one before him. The last VP elected with a beard was Charles Fairbanks in 1904.
Okay.
So Roosevelt era again. The last president elected with a beard, Benjamin Harrison in 1888.
I was thinking of Benjamin Harrison.
So there you go. So it's a long time between shaves as far as the presidency goes. So I hope that's historical enough for you, Ricky. I don't want to go into any more detail on that.
For someone who didn't promise to give a complete history of beards, you gave a pretty good one.
Under promise, over deliver, Dave. Put on a t-shirt, Lucky. No, don't. Amazing medical stats correspondence. This is from
Okay.
PEP 180. We had 2 amazing stats. I had trouble fully believing, but I passed them on because they seemed legit. At least I found them in legit publications. And so I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I'll pass them on.
Okay, yes.
One of them is kind of checked out. The other one, not so much.
Okay.
Our very own health professional, Dr. Pseudonym, she looked into the first of them. I passed on a Rand Corp study, which suggested, I wish you were here for this one, Dave, you would have loved it. Generic medicines in America actually cost substantially less than generic medicines in comparable countries.
Okay.
And since 90% of the prescription volume for drugs in America are generics, it means that people pay less for drugs in America than they do in a lot of other countries.
That does not sound correct.
You would think that. You would think this is the one that isn't going to check out. But guess what?
What?
Dr. Pseudonym looked into it. It was a Rand Corp study, and she was quite pleased with the study. She said, no, this is okay. But she did find a qualifier.
What's that?
The qualifier, let me remind you of the comparisons, by the way, before I get into the qualifier. Canadian generics were 156% more expensive than American generics. Italian generics were 117% more expensive. UK, 113%. Japan, 104%. Mexico, 96%. France, 89%. And Germany, 79%. That was a study, right? Yeah. I'll just quote Dr. Pseudonym for you. Speaking of too nerdy for TV, I have found an enlightening 2017 white paper from the Schaefer Center, USC affiliated. It's called The Flow of Money Through the Pharmaceutical Distribution System by Sood et al. And she summarized this study as, consumer prices are still variable and hard to track in America. Manufacturer gross prices for non-branded generic medications may be low by international standards, but there are still several intermediaries with margins that are added before the final consumer price is calculated.
Right.
Sood et al. Calculate that for every $100 spent at the pharmacy, approximately $41 goes to intermediaries, e.g. pharmacy benefits managers, insurers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, by my calculations, which maybe there's some misunderstanding, but using those numbers, those exact numbers, by my calculations, it suggests the intermediaries add about 70% to the price. Which means, even with all those intermediaries, even if there are 0 intermediaries in the relevant comparison countries, American generics are still cheaper. Recall, before you could come in here, recall the comparisons. Instead of being 70% more expensive because of American intermediaries, the other countries started with Germany, who was 79% more expensive. Then there was France, which was 89% more expensive, and they went up from there. What do you want to say, Dave?
So this doesn't square with how much more Americans spend on healthcare than every other country.
Well, they spend on stuff other than drugs as well.
Yes, but even on drugs, okay, so 90% of drugs that are bought are generic.
Yes.
They're not the serious drugs.
No, they're not.
That people need to buy. The actual kind of medicine that people need to take to keep themselves alive, that's often not available in generic form. So yes, you can get, generic Nurofen or generic hay fever tablets. I can easily imagine that's like 90% of the drugs that are bought. The stuff that really people spend most of their money on is not generic. And that is incredibly expensive.
It certainly is.
So I can imagine that maybe Americans are paying less for generic drugs. It doesn't mean they're paying less overall for drugs.
I'm not suggesting they are. But I mean, I understand you're just trying to reconcile this in your head.
Yes.
I totally understand. And look, I think what you're saying is almost certainly the case.
Yes.
That we know just how expensive their branded drugs are.
Yes,
I cited the number.
I
in that study. It was like 440% or something.
I also do, from personal experience, know how cheap generic drugs are in the US. Like when I'm over there, I can get great. I can get a 1,000 Nurofen for $6.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Totally.
Anyway, I just found it really it just adds a little bit of nuance to this discussion.
Sure.
I love that Dr. Pseudonym could get to the bottom of it for us.
I also love, by the way, this American, well, this is not technically a drug, but melatonin.
Yes.
You could just get a lot of powerful melatonin there in a jar at CVS just off the shelf. If you try to get that in Australia, like often you need a prescription, and when you take your mother-in-law's melatonin, there's a big thing on it saying, "Do not take this if you're over 55." You're like, it's melatonin. It's not even a drug. It's probably fake. It's probably all psychosomatic.
I feel like there's an awesome tangent treehouse to explore this story just a little bit more, but I won't. I'll show some restraint. We're still in the correspondence. Just an extra little nugget from Dr. Pseudonym while she was going through this study. She also noted that we shouldn't feel sorry for generic manufacturers in America because they are still a massively profitable industry.
Yes.
In that same paper, they found, I'll put the graph up here for those who are watching, they found that the branded medicine manufacturers made, on average, net margins of about 28%. Then the tobacco industry was next, making margins of about 27%. Then the alcoholic beverage industry were next, making margins of about 19%. But then it was generic medicine manufacturers who had margins of about 18%. And then you had software companies had margins of about 15% and went down from there. So the generic medicine guys are still doing okay, even though they're quite cheap.
Very well. Do you know which businesses, so that's which manufacturers have the highest margin? Do you know which businesses overall have the highest margin?
I don't.
Car leasing.
Oh.
It's like 50% margins.
Wow.
And rental property leasing is actually not very far behind that.
There you go.
Like, if you want to know what America's most parasitical industries are.
If I am reincarnated and I hate myself, I'll become a car leaser. I'm not having to go with all the car leasing peps, of course. The peppers, I know there's a lot of car leasing peppers out there. I love your work. I'm kind of biased because I don't even have a driver's license. So,
Nor do I.
You either. No, we're perfect for each other, Dave. No wonder we found each other. We are the two most arrested development middle-aged men in Australia. This is fantastic. Lucky, by the way, is just abusing me by text that he says, "Why the fuck is the 24-year-old in the room the only one who can drive?" It's a good question, Lucky. Lucky's starting to reevaluate his employment choices, I feel. DJT correspondence. Lots and lots of people corrected me about Trump's stock. I spoke about the Truth Social shares like they were 16 cents a share rather than $16 a share.
Oh.
Yes, it's $16 a share.
Yeah. I thought cents did sound a bit low.
So I got a few months ahead of myself there. It'll be 16 cents a share next year, early next year. Also, some late breaking Trump Bible news as well. At September's Oklahoma State Board of Education meeting.
Oh, I saw this.
You saw this one?
Yeah.
School Superintendent Ryan Walters, he requested an additional $3 million for a total of $6 million now to purchase new King James Version Bibles. What he's referring to is the fact in Oklahoma, they've made the Bible compulsory in schools. That's a whole different story. I'm sure we discussed this in PEP previously. But here's where it gets interesting.
Yep.
Where it gets interesting is they've changed the specs of what Bibles qualify to be bought for schools.
Okay.
Let me go through the new specs. Only the King James Version qualifies. Now, that was the case before anyway.
Yep.
But the new specs are that it must include copies of the United States Pledge of Allegiance,
Just like the original King James Bible.
Yes. Oh,
yes.
Wait. The United States Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the U.S. Bill of Rights. Also, this is very important. This is a stipulation. Yes. It must be bound in leather or leather-like material.
And does it have to contain handwritten lyrics of Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA as well?
Didn't go quite that far because they didn't need to go quite that far.
Because that is the only Bible. Wow.
In the Mardell Christian bookstore, they have 2,900 Bibles and only one satisfies those requirements, and you can guess which one it is. Also, we should note that the superintendent's request for $6 million to buy 55,000 Bibles It breaks down to a little over $100 a Bible. All right. Not a bad yield for Trump. For text, which is free to obtain online.
Exactly.
They don't even need a book. They can just use the internet.
Although I don't think Trump's getting royalties on that.
Isn't it?
I think that was a flat $30,000 deal.
Oh, really?
But I'm not entirely sure. People can correct us on that. I just got to say, I love people who think that the King James Bible is somehow the original Bible. That because it was the first English version, that makes it the original one.
This is King James, who was around in the 1600s.
Yes.
Right, okay. Yes.
Now,
yes.
I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
the original Bible is in Hebrew and Greek. But the King James Bible, it is, I would say, the most poetic English version of the Bible. Like, it's probably the one it is considered one of the monuments of the English language in this, fantastic period of 16th century prose. It was a great example of that. But it is not the most accurate translation. Yes.
I believe you.
Yeah. Nearly every translation that's come after it is more accurate, strictly speaking.
Yeah. Well, I should say, by the way, that Walters is not necessarily going to get his way because someone's going to take him to court for sure and claim that the specs are unnecessarily restrictive. Who would have thought?
Yes.
So we'll see about that. But
Because not only is the text of the Bible available online, the text of all those other documents is also freely available online.
that is true. It's true. But I've got one more element of this.
Yeah.
Do you remember how Oklahoma are budgeting for a little over $100 a Bible, right? The AP this week found that the printing company in China shipped about 120,000 Trump Bibles to America earlier this year. And they estimated the value of the shipments worked out to about $3 a Bible. So firstly, a little bit hypocritical from President Trump there, doing business with China instead of America. But secondly, not a bad profit, buying your Bibles at $3 a pop and then selling them for a little over $100 a pop.
And you know the most amazing thing about this of all?
What's that?
For decades, it was a huge thing in evangelical circles to raise money to send Bibles to China.
Oh, the circle is complete.
Yes.
Yes.
Because China was seen as the biggest unevangelized market in the world, still is. So you would get all of these people donating money for Bibles that would supposedly be sent to Hong Kong and then smuggled through. I don't know how real that ever was. I'm sure there were people who were doing it. But yes, the fact that the US is getting its Bibles, not just its Bibles, its Trump Bibles from China is just too perfect for words. It's one of those things that makes me think there actually is a God.
This is your proof of the God.
Yes.
Not what's in the Bible,
That
but the story about the Bible.
kind of symmetry makes me think that there's some sort of guiding force behind it all.
So would you say that the US Study Center endorses
No,
this
the
business plan?
US Study Center does not
No, okay. Just wondering.
does not endorse this particular theology.
Sure. Finally, some Brocky correspondence.
Yes.
We've been running a bit long, but
Okay.
but it's okay.
No, this is very important.
This is extremely important in the
Yes.
US politics podcast. So
Yes.
let's get to the bottom of this.
Yep.
Kane linked us to an article about the energy polarizer. So let me
That's
tell you all
the
about
energy
it.
polarizer. Yes.
Let me tell you all about it. Because, I mean, as always, Dave, you have a good memory for this kind of stuff, but nothing beats actually reading an article.
Yep.
So basically, Peter Brock was having health problems in the 1980s until he felt he was cured by a local chiropractor.
Right.
The chiropractor was called Dr. Eric Dalka. And part of the treatment was to wear crystals as jewelry to, quote, align his energy. So, now, by 1986, Brocky was so into this, such a true believer of this energy alignment. He was just aligning everything. He was just holding crystals near his food. He had those crystals in his office, in his shop, and in his cars, in his Holden car. He put the crystals, right? He secretly hid the crystals in his Holden racing car. But the secret was revealed when, before an actual race, one of the test drivers was testing his car out beforehand
Yeah.
to do him a solid, and the crystal got loose and just started rattling around the cabin. And they almost had a crash because a crystal, another word for a crystal, is a rock. When there's a rock, a big rock just rattling around a race car, that's not a good situation. That's a projectile. That's what that is. So then Brocky fully embraced the technology and he attached a small box with crystals and resin to the body of his car, and he nicknamed it the energy polarizer. That's what he called it. He was such a true believer in this that he pushed for the box to be installed in every single Holden race car, which led Larry Perkins to quit the team because he just said, I'm not doing this. I don't need an energy polarizer. I've got a driver's license, which is more than I can say for you and me, Dave.
I do love that. I mean, it's not like the energy polarizer would have harmed the car's performance.
No.
It just would have done nothing. But I love the fact he was just so outraged by how stupid this was that he quit.
Yeah.
The team with Brock, which was a very successful team. Anyway.
Sadly.
That's good. His dignity was injured.
Yes, but his energy was unpolarized. That's the problem. And then that wasn't enough. Brock started hassling the Holden bosses to install the energy polarizers in every street car they sold as well. And when asked how it worked, finally, they could go out to the public. And when they asked how it worked, Brocky told Wheels magazine that, quote, "It's a magic cure. It makes a shithouse car good." That's how it works. Holden's lawyers decided that was the moment that they need to distance themselves from Brock. If you ask me, sounds like their energy was a little bit misaligned.
Yeah.
It really does. But that's the story of the energy polarizer. Jody wrote in as well about the energy polarizer, noting that original energy polarizers are still available on eBay today, but they're worth more than $10,000. What price would you pay for aligned energy, I ask, Peppers? You can go find it yourself. That's not going to be... Lockie Quinn, do you think we can arrange energy polarizers in the merch? $10,000, they'll pay your wage for a long time. Lockie likes it. Big thumbs up. Okay, Dave, let's get into the content. We're starting off with polling / evangelicals type issues.
Okay.
Okay.
First of all, the overall state of polling, not much change from last week. Incredibly close. There was a New York Times national Siena poll that had Harris up by 3. Probably, I mean, that is good for her because I think that was the first one that had her ahead at all. New York Times Siena was one of the more pessimistic polls for her. Probably the most optimistic thing in there was that she was seen as the change candidate.
Yes.
More people saw her as the candidate of change than Trump.
How did she pull that?
I don't know, but I mean, this is a big poll. This was like 3,600 people or something like that. So I assume it's not just an artifact of the polling.
Yep.
The state level polling hasn't been so good for Harris. The last 48 hours have seen a bunch of Emerson and Quinnipiac polls suggesting that Trump is slightly ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan. Although, of course, when you put these into the average, you still have the same picture that you had before, which is very, very close races. I think according to the New York Times polling averages and probably the 538 ones and maybe even the Silver Bulletin polling averages as well, every swing state is within 1 point except Nevada, which is now actually a slightly more than 1 point lead to Harris, and Arizona, which is about a 1.5 point lead to Trump.
Wow.
But in terms of some other polling things, I know we should mention as well from New York Times Siena, they polled the 3 states that are likely now to determine the Senate, which suggests that Democrats have no shot in Florida, really no shot in Montana, and only a very remote shot in Texas. So a 5 point lead to Cruz in Texas, 6 point lead to Xi in Montana, and 11 point lead or something to Scott in Florida. They also found, polling at the presidential level, that Trump had a 13-point lead in Florida, which is quite out of line with most of the polling that we've been seeing from there, which is about 5 points. Suggested that Trump has a 6-point lead in Ohio, which is a couple of points less than what he won it by in 2020. So, I mean, you know, it is one polling organization, albeit the one that is most highly regarded. Make of those things what you will.
I'll tell you what I make of it. What I will make of it is that there's been a lot of, we talked about this on Planet America last week, there's been a lot of discussion amongst Democrats about what the best state for them to try and save the Senate is.
Yes.
Because Montana does not look like that state anymore.
No.
And I think there's almost unanimity that it's Texas.
Yes.
And that poll suggests that's also the case.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that. And before you go on, Dave,
yes.
I'll just throw in a few things here as well. This is, I just say this for the peppers who didn't see me say this on Play America, because I think this is an important point. According to the Cook Political Report, which also had a very serious survey, Trump is now ahead by, if we go through all the issues, 51-42 on the border and immigration, so 9 points. 50-45 on dealing with the economy, so 5 points.
Yes.
Which isn't that much.
No.
49-46 on dealing with foreign policy, crises and war, so 3 points. 48-45 on dealing with international trade and tariffs, so that's 3 points. 48-46 on dealing with crime and violence, that's 2 points. 47-47 on getting the cost of living and inflation under control.
Yes. Now there's been a recent trend towards when it's asked that particular question, costs of living and inflation, they are increasingly just converging. The economy in general, that 5-point gap is very small given what it has been. There was an American university poll just of women that had Harris ahead of Trump on the economy, I mean, which probably just reflects the gender gap in the voting, but nonetheless fairly notable. Now, there have been other polls that have suggested Trump's 9 or 10 points up on economic issues, but there's definitely been a contraction in that area. And I don't know whether that is because people's perceptions of the economy do actually seem to be improving now, in line with inflation getting a little bit better, still pretty strong economic reports, strong job reports, etc. You know, I think we talked about a year ago about how it takes people's perceptions a year to catch up.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that is actually happening now. Or I don't know if it's just the fact that Harris has successfully presented herself as the candidate you can project anything that you want onto. But there does seem to be a contraction in that issue.
I reckon part of it might be the fact that she has this enormous advertising budget.
Yes.
And what she's been using it for is for positive advertising about the economy.
Yes.
So like saying, I have a plan. This is my tax break for small businesses. This is my price gouging. I'm coming down and I'm cracking down on it. All the stuff which, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of some of those policies, but they at least ostensibly address the issue.
Yes. Now, we are actually at the point now where both candidates keep throwing out quite specific policies.
Yes.
So Trump has $10% cap on credit card interest rates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is actually a price control, unlike
that
Kamala Harris's price gouging policy.
That is a serious price control. It's more serious than what Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders proposed, which is 15%. That sent the Wall Street Journal into conniptions. Yes, you've...
And also, by the way, he can't do it.
No.
The president can't do that.
President cannot do that.
He's like that. He would need to be a dictator for a day to do that.
Yes.
How you going?
Yes. With the very recent announcement, I don't know if you were going to talk about this later on, about making car loans tax deductible.
I wasn't going to, but you might as well talk about it now.
Well, I don't have much to say about it, but just the thing, he is throwing out these policies, which, they're not going to sound good to everyone, but they are going to sound good to some people. So after this long period of neither of them having very much in the way of policy at all, it's now policy time every day.
Oh, What a world.
They are outbidding each other on economic policies, even if you might not think that much of those policies.
We do have some policy time coming up a little later on, but it's going to be about health.
Okay.
Just to finish off that poll before with the Cook Political Report, I talked about all the areas where Trump was ahead. There were a lot of areas, but they're all by not much. By contrast, Kamala Harris was ahead by 8 points, 50-42 on protecting democracy, and 11 points, 51-40 on protecting Social Security and Medicare, and 19 points, 55-36 on dealing with abortion. So she's ahead in less areas, but she's really ahead in those areas.
Yes.
And they might be important areas.
Yes.
For various demographics. So anyways, I found that poll really interesting.
Yeah.
For that, especially for the what you just talked about, the economy reasons.
Yes.
Especially inflation reasons.
Yes.
As an interesting poll from a Democratic firm called Blueprint. So, you can take or leave this one. It's focusing on the 781 Republicans and independents who supported Nikki Haley in the primary. There weren't 781 total, but there's 781 in this survey.
Yes.
Right, so this is a very specialized sample, hard to get. Trump would win 45% of them. Harris would win 36% of them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how they work this out because people always lie when you ask them who they voted for in the past. But according to this poll, Trump won those same voters in 2020 by 59-28. So if that's true, that's a swing from plus 31 to Trump to plus 9 to Trump. So a 22-point swing away from Trump to Harris. Now, the New York Times Senate poll you just described last week found 9% of GOP voters said they'd support Harris, which is up from 5% the month before.
Yeah.
So maybe or maybe not, the Cheney thing is working.
Yeah, look, and we have talked about this as Harris's strategy. As I said in the debate, she seemed to be talking to Nikki Haley supporters for much of the time. So that strategy could be working. Whether that's an election winning strategy is, we will not know that until election day.
Yeah, and just before we go on, I want to talk about this, the three key swing states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I've got a couple of things to say about them. Michigan, let's start off there. Black voters make up about 13% of Michigan's electorate. In 2020, Biden won 92% of those. Right now, Harris is winning 71%. Now, that happened that's on average of polls. That happened in 2022 as well. That polling amongst black people wasn't great in Michigan.
Yeah.
And then they turned out the vote. So that may happen again.
Yes.
But I just note that.
Yes.
Also, when it comes to the youth, the Democrats are down 13 points since 2020 amongst 18 to 29-year-olds. They're 13 points worse off in polling than they were in 2020. Still ahead.
Yeah.
But ahead by 13 points less.
Biden was getting more of them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is a particular problem because in 2022, Michigan had the highest youth turnout in the country. It's probably all your alma maters.
That's right.
Yeah. And this could be, and I mean, I'm just speculating, it might be an Israel issue, it might be a Gaza issue, it might not be, I don't know. But you can throw in Arab Americans there. That definitely is a Gaza issue. Arab Americans make up about 4% of the state population. In 2020, Biden won them by 24 points. According to the latest national Zogby poll, Trump and Harris are tied in the low 40s amongst those people.
I actually suspect it's an economy issue.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Really?
I think that these are the people who have been hit among the hardest by the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
These are voters who, people sort of develop ideologies as they get older. They develop voting habits as they get older. They develop partisan attachments as they get older. These younger voters, a lot of them, it's more about what is this candidate actually going to do for me? And a lot of them, after 4 years of Biden, don't think that Harris is going to do much for them.
Could be the case.
Yes.
And an interesting gamble going on in Michigan, which we've referred briefly to before, but I just want to focus specifically on Michigan here.
Yeah.
Which is the NYT Siena poll, the one you referred to again from the end of September, in Michigan found Harris leading Trump by 48-47. But amongst those who didn't vote in 2020,
yes,
Trump led 50-40. Now, Elon Musk's America PAC and Charlie Kirk's Turning Point Action are both in Michigan targeting people who don't vote.
Yeah.
A lot of professionals say that's stupid
Yes.
because the reason they don't vote is because of reasons that are going to make them not vote again.
Yes.
You're wasting your time, they say. But if they can pull this off, those are where the supporters are for Trump. And he's real close.
This is one of the reasons why this election is going to be so hard to predict, because of these competing theories of how to win the election.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I say, this is a risky strategy. A lot of people don't think very much of it. I think on some level it could be these organizations basically scamming Trump because they don't know how to persuade undecided voters. They just don't know how to do that. What they do know how to do is to rile up the base. So the theory is there's still more of the base out there to be riled up. That's what they're going on. Yeah, Charlie Kirk tells this story, which I'm sure is 100% true, of the guy who wears a MAGA hat and just looks after his family and works hard but doesn't vote.
Okay.
That was the story that Charlie Kirk told.
That's a really shit story.
When he was explaining this strategy.
Charlie needs to work on his story craft.
And in the same way, as I talked about a few months ago, when Trump made his pitch to Christians, like just vote this time and you won't have to vote again in 4 years. The theory of that was that Christians are somehow low propensity voters. You go, oh, they always come to church, but they don't vote. That is just not true. Evangelical Christians are high propensity voters.
They are.
Last time around, they were 19% of the population and 24% of the electorate. So the theory that you've got to go after these groups because they're low propensity and there's just a lot more of them out there to be harvested. Well, do you know who else had that theory? This is a blast from the past.
Who else?
Brad Pascali.
Oh, there's a Brad.
He also believed that. He was constantly telling Trump, oh, yeah, we're tapping into all these networks of conservative Christians who really love you and didn't vote for you last time around.
That was 2020, wasn't it?
That was 2020.
Yeah.
Now, okay, if it turns out that they're actually correct about this, that there is, and there's been this sort of theory about this. Sean Trende wrote that piece, the missing white non-college voter. The theory of that was there are just so many of them who don't vote. There's a lot more out there to be picked up. And that was before the 2016 election. And, that was something that Trump appeared to do. I think ever since then, this has been what they've been chasing. Yeah. The question is, after the last election where 66% of the country voted, as you say, how many of the non-voters left out there are still harvestable votes?
They don't need many, Dave.
That's true. They don't.
In Michigan, they do not need
That's
many.
true. And if they don't, if they can find them, then this could turn out to be what wins the election. Interesting thing about Michigan. So in 2020, and people who remember the last episode of PEP that we did in 2020 may remember some of these numbers.
Those people don't include me.
Because this was about the ridiculous challenge to certification that happened in Michigan.
Yes. Oh, yes, I do remember
In
that.
the city of Detroit, Biden got about 241,000 votes. Trump got about 13,000 votes. But that actually more than or nearly doubled his number from 2016. He had got about 7,000 votes in Detroit. Now, if they're serious about making inroads with black men, which has been one of their big narratives of this year, we can get all of these black male voters. In fact, just in the last 24, something that did happen overnight was Obama kind of scolded black male voters saying, why haven't you made up your minds yet? Is it because you can't handle the thought of a woman as president? Yeah.
Don't do that.
I might be getting that quote wrong, but I think that's what he said. They are not going to Detroit to find reservoirs of male black voters, are they? No, they're going out to rural Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah, to try. What are they doing in Detroit? How are they directing their campaign resources in Detroit? Poll watchers and legal challenges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, which is exactly what they did last time around.
Yeah.
So last time around, they sent a couple of thousand of these rubes to the Cobo Center in Detroit.
Yeah.
And what happened was they were completely untrained. They have no idea of what election counting procedures look like. So when they saw completely routine events happening, like a pile of ballots being moved from one table to another, they cried foul, demanded explanations from election officials who were by this point quite harried. This is one of the reasons why the vote took so long to count in Detroit. But this is also why the courts were flooded with hundreds of pages of affidavits that contained exactly no evidence of electoral fraud, because it was people describing completely normal things. Now, sending 4,000 of these idiots rather than 2,000 of them to Detroit is not going to help Trump at all in the election. Okay, hiring a few more of America's most marginal lawyers to push these cases is not going to help. Actually trying to get the black male vote out for him might help more, but this does not seem to be where these resources are actually getting directed.
I would have to agree with you. Talking about resources being directed, though, I did play this on Planet America, but I'm gonna just in case people didn't watch it there. As soon as I saw this ad, I thought, oh, this is going to hurt Kamala Harris. This ad, and this is the current ad that they're pushing in Michigan.
Attention auto workers. Kamala Harris wants to end all gas-powered cars. Crazy but true. Harris's push requiring electric only is failing big, and Michigan auto workers are paying the price. Massive layoffs already started. You could be next. President Trump's committed to protecting America's auto workers, standing up to China's unfair trade, fixing the economy, and ending inflation.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I mean, the fact that that doesn't interact with reality at all doesn't matter. That's just the kind of ad that is going.
I actually don't think auto workers are that stupid.
No,
I think auto workers are actually pretty well informed about things that are going on.
But do you think this is for auto workers? Or do you think it's for people who are worried about the economy?
Yeah, I think in Michigan, people actually have a pretty good understanding of the whole industry. The newspapers in Michigan cover to the extent that the newspapers still exist. But,
Yeah, sure.
TV news covers the auto industry pretty extensively.
Okay. All right.
And like the idea, massive layoffs have already begun. This is an industry where massive layoffs have been taking place for decades.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, Matt, maybe you're right. Wisconsin, quickly. I want to note that you already talked about Quinnipiac. I want to note that in the Senate, Tammy Baldwin is now only 2 points ahead of her Republican challenger. But I wanted to say something really interesting that isn't really, well, I think it's going to become a bigger story. I just saw this in AP the other day and didn't get much coverage. But I thought, here's interesting. If it comes down to a point or two, there is another name on the ballot which people will start talking about. It's the name Thomas Leger. Thomas Leger is a conservative. His party is the America First Party.
Right.
Which is an interesting name for a party.
Yeah.
And he seems to be a legit conservative,
Yeah.
but just not a very bright legit conservative, which might make him even more legit as a conservative. He was tangled up in the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, but he didn't actually get indicted. He's that conservative.
High quality candidate.
And he's been polling about 1 or 2% quite consistently in this Senate race. Now, the thing about him is he told the AP he was recruited last year to run by people who said they were with the group, the Patriots Run Project. And that group, the Patriots Run Project, was funded entirely by Democratic firms and donors who work to promote pro-Trump independent candidates in key House and Senate races. Most of them didn't get up, but Thomas Leger, he did get up. and he seems really dumb. And Liga's financial supporters include people who have donated millions of dollars to Democratic groups. So we've seen this kind of thing before. This is a classic dirty tricks campaign. And if Wisconsin's Senate seat is within 2%, he may make the difference.
Wow. Just in that vein, and just going back across Lake Michigan for a sec to the mitten, one of the things about the Michigan race is Kennedy is still on the ballot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
that is a factor.
So that is a potential factor. And this is reflected in J.D. Vance's most recent speech there, where he talked all about Kennedy's bullshit health agenda and making America healthy again.
Yes, yes.
And he name-checked Kennedy in all of this. So they are clearly aware of the Kennedy problem. My guess is he will still get like 2% of the vote.
Which, once again, could be all the difference.
Because Michigan was one of the states where he was polling most. He was often getting 10% there before he dropped out.
This is a very policy type tangent treehouse. But
okay, but a tangent treehouse nonetheless.
Exactly. There we go. But I really hope that, leaving aside any other reasons, I really hope that both this Lager guy and RFK in Michigan make the difference in the Senate seat, and that the Republicans lose by like a point in both of them because of the ridiculous balloting system they've got.
Yeah.
Because one thing that really gives me the shits in America at the moment is the fact that ranked choice voting, or the Australian system, has become partisan. And it shouldn't become partisan. There's no reason for it to be partisan. It's just a sensible way to run your election. But just simply because the first instance of it was in Alaska, and Sarah Palin lost because of it, it's convinced a whole bunch of conservatives that ranked choice voting is some kind of
conspiracy.
Yeah, some kind of conspiracy organized by the left.
Yeah.
And I want as many Republicans to lose because of their stupid system as possible, so they get the taste for ranked choice voting as well, because America would be so much better off if they could have ranked choice voting in all Senate and House seats.
By the way, let me just clarify, especially for all of our Maine peppers, you know who you are. Maine was the first state to introduce ranked choice.
No, I'm saying, but the first state to have some kind of controversial outcome.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I mean, look, the Maine governor lost with a plurality.
Yes.
Plurality.
Yes.
Under this, but it wasn't as controversial as Sarah Palin's, because Sarah Palin's was ridiculous, where you had the two Republicans together having an easy majority.
Yes.
But just because some of the Republicans hated Sarah Palin so much, she ended up losing. So anyway, but it's because of the Alaska one. They just went crazy about Alaska.
Yeah.
Anyway, so go Lager is what I have to say. Liga or whatever your name is. Okay, and then Pennsylvania. What I wanted to just point out a couple of quick things.
Yes.
The Republican registrations have been catching up for years in Pennsylvania. I'm going to show the people who are watching a graph. This is the graph here of registrations over the years. You can see independents are going up a little bit. They're the orange line.
Yep.
Republicans are going up a lot, and Democrats are going down a bit. They've gone from basically, and you're talking back in 2014, just before Trump, there was over a million registration difference between Democrats and Republicans. And now it's like 330,000.
Yep.
Democrats still ahead, but they're falling behind all the time. The Republicans are catching up all the time. So I think that's an interesting little element, which I think we should keep our eyes on.
Yes.
It doesn't get talked about a lot. The other thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is Latinos in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
We talk about Latinos in Arizona.
Yes,
we talk about Latinos in other places. But I'll get Steve Kornacki to explain why we care about Latinos in Pennsylvania.
But let's talk about this collection here. Some people call this the Latino belt of Pennsylvania. These are counties that have some small, mid-sized cities with rapidly growing Latino populations. And we've been talking about Trump improving relative to 2020 and 2016 among Hispanic voters. Well, you can see it. Here are some of the cities in that Latino belt in Pennsylvania. Reading, Pennsylvania, it's 70% Latino. Now, it was overwhelmingly Democratic in 2020. Joe Biden won by 45 points. But look at that. That's down almost 20 points from 2012. Hazleton, Pennsylvania, more than 60% Hispanic. In 2012, Democrats won it narrowly. It's now a double-digit Trump place. Allentown, it has come down 10 points in its margin for Democrats. Can Trump grow new support in the Latino counties, the emerging Latino counties with large populations of Latino voters in Pennsylvania? That's a key from his campaign standpoint to the state, to the Keystone State, Christy.
And reminding you, the Cook Report found that Harris is only leading Trump by 12 points among Latinos at this point in time, down from 23 points to Biden in 2020. We've talked about that a lot, but I don't think we've talked about it in the context of Pennsylvania. So there's something to look out for, given Pennsylvania's going to be so tight.
Yes. Now, Pennsylvania, in all of that surge of polling that was otherwise good for Trump, Harris actually got the win in Pennsylvania in the Quinnipiac.
And the final thing I'll say before I throw to you about your religion stuff,
yes,
is we should note, we all know what the three states are: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are going to be slow counts.
Yep.
Very slow counts.
Yes.
Under the current law, both Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin, pre-canvassing, which is opening mail ballots and processing them through the voting machine, can begin only on election day. A lot of states, they do them weeks in advance. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they can only do them on election day, and they can only start counting on election night. So what that means is that that it'll be days and days for them to go through all those early votes. And so if it's close, which it will be, we're not going to know the result in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which is going to determine the election probably until day 4 or day 5, I reckon.
Yep.
So just get ready for it. People are going to complain about it when it happens, but it's just the law.
Yes.
Dave.
By the way, if you're wondering which states count them quickly, Florida is the current gold standard for counting them quickly, which I think is probably due to the 2000 debacle.
It is.
I think that's, yeah. But also North Carolina counts them fairly quickly. So there could be indications from those states about, sort of how it's going to go. But it is most likely to come down to those states. Okay, let's talk about evangelicals.
Please.
So in the last couple of weeks, we have seen Trump tweeting out in all caps, "I will veto a national abortion ban." We've seen Melania Trump emerging for the first time as a spokesperson for something.
Yep.
And it's for this softened stance on abortion.
Yep.
We've seen Trump basically openly say to evangelicals, "I can throw you under the bus on this issue."
Yep.
And to say to Republicans, we need to win the election. That's more important than this abortion bullshit. So, how could this potentially affect the evangelical vote? According to Pew, not very much. According to Pew, 82% of evangelicals are still with Trump, which is what he won in 2020. So that would suggest no effect at all. But that might not be where the effect is. The effect wouldn't be in evangelicals suddenly voting for Harris. It would be in evangelicals not showing up to the polls. Given that they're a high propensity group, given that so many of them, has he just pushed a few of them too far? Now, it wouldn't have to be many. 1%. This is one of those elections. 1% of that 25% doesn't show up for him. He's potentially, when you have a voting group that's a quarter of the population and 82% of the are going for you, losing it's in the same way. Democrats don't need to lose many African Americans in order to lose an election.
Yep.
Yeah.
And importantly, people staying home.
Yes.
It's not going to show up in the polls.
No, exactly
you
right.
You won't know till it happens.
Exactly right. Now, some pieces of worrying evidence for Trump on this front. PRRI found that Trump's approval rating with white evangelicals was 68% this year. 68%.
Wow.
That's a lot lower
yes.
than one would expect. Now, just a caveat on this. I heard someone from PRRI talking about this on a panel, at the American Political Science Association conference. I have not actually been able to find this poll. So I can't give you documented evidence of it yet.
Sure.
But I assume that this person was telling the truth. The other thing is, and God damn it, I wish I could remember what poll this came from.
Dave speaks for 3 hours without even turning his phone over.
Yeah.
And he's damning God because he's forgotten one poll.
Yes.
Yes.
Which was, at the last election, a bit of a diploma divide actually emerged among evangelicals. There had been no difference between college-educated and non-college-educated white evangelicals in their vote in 2016. There actually was a bit of a gap in 2020.
I'm surprised, to be honest.
Yeah. So if the diploma divide continues to expand in the way that it's been doing, that version of the diploma divide could also continue to expand. Now, in some ways, this is not the most harmful thing because a lot of evangelicals don't go to college. But in an election that is this tight, there are millions of college-educated evangelicals out there. If they don't like Trump quite as much as their non-college brethren, that is something that could potentially hurt him. So the combination of, potentially sort of leaking votes of evangelical moderates who just can't stand him anymore, and the ones who really feel betrayed on the abortion issue, who really feel this is the reason why you get political power in the first place. If you're not going to use it, then why would we support you? But yeah, it's the way that they're most likely to express that is by not turning up. They are basically a captive constituency at this point, as African Americans are for the Democratic Party. What that means in political science terms is you can do whatever you like to this group because you're confident that they're not going to vote for the other side.
Maybe they'll vote for Liga. Thomas Liga. Maybe. I hadn't really thought about this. This is an interesting area.
Yeah. Now, I mean, this might not turn out to have any effect at all.
Yeah.
But there would definitely be people in Trump world who are worried about this.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it.
No.
Yeah, just like he can't in the last 3 weeks of an election. Reach out to the evangelicals.
And one of the reasons why there's not much that he can do about it is because the ones who are going to defect, the ones who are going to stay home, they're going to be very quiet about it. There are not many evangelical figures out there speaking against Trump, either from the right or the left anymore. So there's no one that they can kind of go after. There's no identifiable group that they can go after. It's going to be largely evangelical women just quietly not voting. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do now. I assume you'll finish that section.
I am finished with that section.
What I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about the floods. There was a potentially long flood section. I hadn't really prepared it, but I was going to do it off the top of my head. But I'm conscious of the time. I don't want this to. I mean, we obviously have no 3-hour limit, but I don't want this to go for 12 hours. So what I'm going to do, and also I just find the whole topic depressing, and I really don't want to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene and weather control. Weather control. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I don't even understand the theory about this lithium mine that they're trying to raid Indiana Jones style. I don't understand it. Let's not worry about it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make one good point that you haven't heard enough. Okay, because there aren't many good points being made during this flood. So I'll make one good point for you, and I want to give you one piece of nonsense.
Okay.
So we'll leave it at that. The piece of nonsense I want to give you, and this is an insight into why I'm just depressed by this whole topic, is one of the AI images that human beings are taking seriously. Human beings have seen this image, Dave. Do you want to describe for the listeners what you're looking at?
Oh, my God. Trump wading through floodwaters wearing a bright orange life jacket. Looking very masculine, sir.
Yes. He's kind of saving someone, kind of. The person,
Yeah.
the person he's in inverted commas saving is just walking along as well. But I think it's implied that Trump is to the rescue.
Yes. And Chaz is actually showing me a Twitter post.
Yes.
Posted by someone who obviously believes this, saying
Yes.
they don't want you to see this side of Trump. Kamala wouldn't be doing this. ... Oh, wait. ... Yeah, she hasn't done this at all.
That's true. She's
Now,
right about that.
Just remember, every time
Yeah.
you see a picture of Trump doing something heroic,
Yeah.
just ask yourself, is there any chance that Trump would not be publicizing this as widely as possible?
It's a great question, Dave.
Yes.
That's a great question. I'll get you to ask something else as well.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like an AI type, if you're concerned that there's a possibility it might be an AI type image.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what clothes does Donald Trump wear? 100% of the time. In bed, in the shower, while he's having sex with said women. What is he wearing? He's wearing that bloody suit.
Yes.
The long red tie.
Yep.
What he's wearing here is blue jeans and a denim shirt.
Yeah.
Donald Trump isn't wearing a denim shirt in real life. He's wearing blue jeans in real life.
No.
Oh, God.
But I'm sure that's going to be on a trading card or an NFT or something.
Definitely coming to an NFT near you. You will pay $99 for that image. I promise you one day. The University of Sydney is going to endorse you paying $99 for this image one day. Anyway, so that's the misinformation I wanted to share with you
Okay,
as an
yep.
indication of the kind of crap that we're not going to be talking about.
Okay.
I want to make one good point, which is when we're talking about FEMA running out of money, right, which they're not about to run out of, but they'll run out of soon enough,
Yeah.
especially if there's another hurricane coming. This flood alone in North Carolina has been estimated to be $32 billion potentially worth of damage, right? So they'll need more money for that because they've got $20 billion. All right. While they may or may not run out of money anytime soon, they run out of money every year these days. All the time they run out of money. Every time there's a decent-sized disaster, they run out of money. They ran out after Hurricane Harvey, after Hurricane Maria, after Hurricane Florence. It goes on. Why do they keep running out of money? And that is actually the more interesting question, rather than are they spending all on illegal immigrants? Answer no, they're not. But a much more interesting question is why do they keep running out of money? It's because disaster budgets are calculated to past events. And the damage bills are going up.
Yep.
And they're not just going up because of climate change. Because I know that's the first thing people are going to say, climate change. Hey, it's happening.
Yes.
The storms are more intense. That's true. But that's not the only reason why. Another reason is because people keep building up in these areas they shouldn't be, like Florida, the entire state. Right? And so the damage bill is going up because there's more development in those areas. But also a factor which people never think about is our expectations of the federal government are going up as well.
Yes.
Until very recently, people didn't expect the federal government to just completely recompense them for all damage.
Yeah.
But now they do.
Yeah.
They very much do. And if you don't do it right away, you're going to get a black eye as a president.
When a hurricane destroyed large parts of New Orleans in the 1960s, like LBJ's response was to fly over in a helicopter and go, oh, well, shit.
It's very LBJ.
You know, and that was considered a great act of statesmanship. As you say, people's expectations have changed.
They really have.
By the way, Florida, for those peppers who don't know, it is the flattest state in the union. Do you know what the highest natural point in Florida is? How high above sea level it is?
This is sounding like a good stats nugget. Hang on, should I do it? Should I play this?
Yes, yeah.
Let's do it.
Stats nugget.
This deserves it, Dave. I can tell already this deserves it. Because I'm betting the answer isn't 1,000 feet.
No, it's 80 meters.
There you go.
That's the highest point.
That's not much.
No.
That's not much.
And
at
it's
all.
not a very big mound either for the state with one of the biggest populations in America.
Yeah. No, so I mean that is a factor. Like all these people in this dangerous area, people's expectations is a factor. Also, just the lack of insurance is becoming more and more of an issue.
Yep.
This region that we're talking about here that was just flooded. Take a guess the percentage of that area that has flood insurance.
0%.
Nah, it's not
Who's
that
going to
bad.
provide flood insurance in that area?
Well, actually, it should be. In terms of who's going to provide it, everyone should provide it because you wouldn't expect there to be floods in that area because it wasn't a typical flooding area. It was inland. It was a surprise.
Yep.
But the answer is 2%.
Right.
2% of people had flood insurance.
Okay.
So that adds to the cost as well for the federal government, since the federal government has to pick up the tab for everyone.
Yes.
$34 billion, I said before, that Moody's estimated the damage is. That is all going to the federal government. Okay, so what's going to stop this cycle of just greater and greater payments from from FEMA that they run out of money for, apart from just getting more funding? One of them is there was a study by the US Chamber of Commerce, which was quite interesting, which found every dollar of disaster preparedness saves communities $13 in damages, cleanup costs, and economic impacts.
Yep.
So you'd think what they might be doing is a bit of disaster preparation.
Yes.
Since 2018, the government set aside 6% of the total of post-disaster grant spending to go towards pre-disaster mitigation.
Yep.
So 6% of what they spend cleaning up, they spend on pre-disaster mitigation, which is better than nothing, which is what there was before. But they need a whole lot more. But the problem is, number one, they're spending so much on this post-disaster stuff, there's no money left for pre-disaster stuff.
Yep.
And number two, no politician wants to spend money on that. If you spend money on pre-disaster mitigation, you're just increasing the deficit. If you spend money on post-disaster relief, you're winning votes. You're not winning votes with mitigation. And so it just goes against every political instinct that they have. So anyway, but that is, if you want to know the way you break this cycle of just these constant disasters sending FEMA bankrupt and all the rest of it, that's how you do it.
Yep.
And every single time this happens from now on, I'm going to bring this up because it's just going to be, this is going to be my disaster equivalent of talking about with immigration. Every time we talk immigration, I always talk about the employment checks.
Yes.
It's just going to be the same thing with this. I just keep on bringing it up.
I've just sent you a photo of a place where people can live in Florida if it gets...
oh, here we go.
Yes.
Oh, look at this.
Yeah.
Is this real?
This is real.
Okay, describe what we're looking at here, Dave.
So these were these houses that were built, I think, in the 70s or the 80s as these kind of futuristic houses in Florida. They look like something out of Star Wars.
I was going to say it looks like one of the huts in Tatooine.
Yes,
except for on stilts.
Yeah, there's these domes on stilts in water.
Yeah,
that's the future.
Yeah,
I mean
nice.
it's actually the past, but it could be the future again.
They're only like 3 or 4 meters high.
Yeah, they're going to need to be a bit.
They're going to need high stilts.
Bit higher.
They're going to need to get the stilts. If we're talking Star Wars, they're going to need to get the legs from the Empire Strikes Back sort of laser machines, whatever those things were called, those walkers. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about floods. So that's going to save us some time. Let's talk about unions, Dave.
Let's talk about unions.
Yeah.
Last week, we did not talk about the East Coast International Longshoremen's Association strike, which had just begun.
Yes.
We thought we can get to that next week. The strike will still be going.
How wrong we were.
It is not still going.
No.
Okay, so this strike had been in the works since earlier this year. And the big issue was wages.
Yeah.
Because various international shipping lines made out like bandits from the pandemic. They saw their profits increase by hundreds of billions of dollars. So the International Longshoremen's Association representing the 47,000 workers in East Coast ports, who, by the way, were constantly told during the pandemic what important, vital workers they were for keeping the whole economy going. They're like, we want a decent share of that money. So they kept getting lowball offers from the Maritime Alliance, which is the consortium of companies that represents all the companies.
Look, to be fair, when you say low ball offers, like the last one was like 55%.
No. They didn't. That only came within the last few weeks.
Yeah, sure.
It was much lower offers.
Okay, all right.
Much lower.
We're going
offers
back. Okay,
that.
sure.
Okay,
right.
yes, yeah. But yes. By the time you get to the strike, the union was asking for 77% increase over 6 years, and they were being offered 50%.
Yeah.
Okay, so the strike happens. These longshoremen very conscientiously worked overtime in the days before the strike to ensure that the impact would not be too bad. So everyone knew that the strike was coming. Everyone's...
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry. I just got to get a really cool fact in here.
Yeah.
Do you know the one thing? You talk about how conscientious they were, how they were stacking extra stuff beforehand to not put people out.
Yeah.
Did you know that one of the industries that they were still loading for even during the strike?
Yep.
There were two that I know of. There might be more.
Right.
Because they were such conscientious types.
Yes.
One of them was they were still loading military cargo.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
The other one
Yep.
was they were still supplying cruises.
Wow.
Cruises. Because they were worried that people would book these cruises long in advance and they'd have their cruise ruined by the strike.
How nice is that?
That's conscientious.
Yeah.
It's weird, but it's very conscientious.
Yeah.
All right, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone's eyes were on Joe Biden at this point. And there was a lot of speculation, okay, because this strike could have been very economically damaging, which most people would read as being very damaging to Kamala Harris's election chances. But, in general, it just could have messed up the economy. Biden has previously intervened in a lot of strikes, which have had serious economic consequences. There was a lot of speculation that he would invoke the Taft-Hartley Act. Okay, so let's just rewind for a bit of union history here in the United States. Unions were comprehensively and violently defeated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I mean, really violently defeated. Being a union activist was a job that came with a severe risk of violent and early death in those days. A lot of companies employed private security forces, which were lethal and unscrupulous. The government let it happen because they thought that there were too many communists and anarchists in the unions. So unions really had to fight for legitimacy, which they eventually got with the New Deal. Okay, they got it with the Wagner Act in 1935, which provided, finally, legal protection for union organizing. But it came at a big cost, right? Which was unions had to be politically docile and had to purge leftists from their ranks. Now, in 1946, there was a wave of pretty significant strikes. Republicans took over Congress in 1947, both houses of it for the first time in 20 years, and they passed the Taft-Hartley Act, which rolled back a lot of the protections of the Wagner Act. It was nearly all Republicans went along with this, but a majority of Democrats went along with Taft-Hartley as well, because there were such long traditions of labor repression in the South, which is where the majority of Democratic congressional delegates came from in that Congress. Most of them supported this as well. And to this day, when you look at right-to-work laws, which are anti-union laws that they're there in most Republican-dominated states, they've been in most of the South since the Taft-Hartley Act was passed in 1947. So one of the things that Taft-Hartley allows is for federal injunctions in order to break strikes. Biden said, and this was a critical part of the whole process, he said, no, I am not using Taft-Hartley. And this is one of the things that will reinforce his record as the most pro-Labor president of all time. This is one of the reasons why, as we mentioned, that Teamsters poll a couple of weeks ago. Now, there's been a lot of shit put on this poll because of the fact that people were recruited from like the back page of the Teamsters magazine. Nonetheless, it did probably show that there was a significant drop in support from Biden to Harris. Biden is very well regarded in the Labor movement. So this strike, as it happened, only went for 3 days. And the Biden team was actively involved in negotiations. There was a great piece about this in the Washington Post that described how the White House Chief of Staff, I think is Jeff Zients, it was like after they'd been up until 2 a.m. talking to the longshoremen, they were on a phone call with the Maritime Alliance at 5:30 in the morning, negotiating with them. And at the end of the call, Jeff Zients said, great, okay, by the way, in 12 hours, we're going to negotiate that you've accepted a deal. Bye. They had not accepted a deal. But within 12 hours, they accepted one. Yeah, it was, so it ended up with they got a 62% pay rise over 6 years. Some economists, I can't remember who it was, described this as the most profitable 3-day period of industrial relations in history.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, given the size of what they got and given the lack of economic damage done by the strike. Like, I can't emphasize how much damage this strike could have done and did not do. It backed up supply chains a little bit, but not very much at all.
Did nothing to cruisers.
Yeah, nothing to cruisers at all. And also, obviously, completely minimized the political damage. Instead, what we got was a week of good economic news.
Yeah.
For Kamala Harris. So this could turn out to be a pretty important event.
Can I just say quickly,
yes,
that for people who don't know the ins and outs of their wages,
yeah,
I mean, these guys get paid a bit already.
Yes,
anyway.
yeah.
Like, they're pretty well paid for blue collar workers.
Yeah, because it's an important industry.
Totally.
Yeah.
But what you may not realize is that the West Coast longshoremen,
yes,
these are the East Coast longshoremen. The West Coast longshoremen get paid a lot more than the East Coast.
Now,
so this 62%, I mean, it's going to get them above the West Coast, but not by as much as you might think.
Part of that is the West Coast longshoremen have far more militant traditions. The West Coast longshoremen back in the day were run by Harry Bridges, an Australian communist.
Ooh.
Yeah, West Coast longshoremen were the closest thing there was to a kind of Australian-style union that was really politically active. Like, it was actually active in left-wing causes well beyond the interests of those workers. There's a great book about this by Margaret Levy and John Alquist called In the Interest of Others, about why some unions are more politically active than others. The Teamsters, by the way, being the big example of a non-politically active union, of a union which is really only about the direct economic interests of its members. Margaret Levy and John Alquist are both really worth reading on Labor stuff. I actually saw Margaret Levy earlier this year. I asked her about all of these strikes, all of this industrial action that's been happening over the last year. What's the significance of it? She cautioned me against seeing this as too much of a victorious movement for unions in general. She's talked about there are still a lot of setbacks going on. The one that she identified as the most important was the UAW strike, because that was actually a significant change in tactics that brought about really significant results. And we might be beginning to look at things like unionization of Southern auto workers for the first time. But at the same time, there's a lot of setbacks going on as well in places like Amazon and Starbucks.
Before we move to the general,
yes.
Are you about to move to the general or not?
The general picture of unions in this election?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Okay, I want to say one more thing about the agreement.
Yes, yeah.
Which is, there were two parts to this. You focused on the wages.
Yes.
But there was also the issue of automation.
That's right, yes, yeah.
Like, and the wage they're happy with now. Like, that was a complete agreement.
Yes.
That's cool. No, assuming that the ILW agrees, the actual, like the rank and file agrees to this deal, that's done.
Yeah.
But they basically put off the dispute about automation to January 15
Yes,
from memory.
they did, yes.
Which is going to be the problem of the next president, whoever that may be. And I just want to just talk about that because my personal view,
Yep.
this is very much my personal view, and I'll be interested to know if you agree with me or disagree with me,
Yep.
is that I had no problems with the wage claims
Yep.
that the ILW were going for, but I didn't like the automation claims. And and I still don't like it. And I'm hoping the fact they've put off the January 15 means they'll just take their 62% and just be happy. But if this becomes an actual strike and an actual standoff, I won't be pleased about that because I don't agree with them. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. The ILA's existing contract and the Department of Transportation rules stipulate that automation is never allowed to reduce the number or quality of jobs. That's what's on the record. They don't want that. What they want is the ILA wants to change the conditions to ban any further automation completely. That's their position. Now, obviously it's going to be negotiated, but that's their starting position.
Yeah.
All right? No automation at all. Now, what I'm about to read you is shamelessly pilfered from Noah Smith. But I happen to agree with Noah Smith.
Okay.
And this is, I say that for two reasons. Number one, because it's only fair, because it is shamelessly pilfered from Noah Smith.
Yeah, yeah.
It's also, I say that to just get inside Dave's head, because Noah Smith is Dave's friend.
And by the way,
Yes.
so Noah Smith, when you describe someone as smart, Noah Smith is what I think of when I think of smart.
Oh, yeah, he's smart. Yeah.
That's why I keep disagreeing with you when you say JD Vance is really smart. Like, no, he's not. Noah Smith is really smart.
Okay.
Yes.
Noah Smith, for the record, is definitely smarter than JD Vance.
Yes.
All right, but I think by the standards of normal human beings, normal mere mortals, I think
Yes.
JD Vance is very smart. But I think Noah Smith is way smart.
Yes.
Way smart. Okay.
Yes.
That's why I'm pilfering from it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, first of all, the one of the points that Noah makes is that the it's just Noah.
Yeah.
Is it makes the point that the work they do is tough, right? And so the whole point of automation is to make work easier.
Yes.
And he makes the comparison to, if you look at the Chinese virtual longshoremen, where they have a lot more technology.
Yeah.
It's a very different situation. Those guys aren't carting around crates. Like they're just sitting in a room. It's basically a computer game. The longshoremen are just playing a computer game.
Yeah.
And there's robots doing it. And there's still lots of longshoremen there. They're just in front of computers.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a much nicer life for a longshoreman, right? And that's the first step. That's the first point. The second point is, what's that?
Sorry, this is a slight tangent.
Yeah, go,
Yes.
yeah, of course. Go for it.
Yes. I remember in a hotel in China when I was there a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of services that are done by robots now.
Yeah.
And at one point, we're waiting for the lift, and this robot shows up. And the lift opened, and the robot actually said to us, "Okay, I'm getting in this lift now. Say Jan."
The robot told you.
Yes.
What a polite robot.
Yes. We were so shocked by its politeness, we didn't even follow it into the lift. We're worried it might start making conversation with us. But anyway, so yes.
That's cool.
Anyway, China has no problem with automation.
Certainly doesn't.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the first thing. The first point. Second point is, who said automation means less jobs? I mean, it can mean less jobs. It definitely can.
Yep.
But maybe it also means more capacity. And more capacity means you can move more, which means there might be more jobs.
Yeah.
Right? It certainly means more wages for the people who are still there because it's higher productivity
Yes.
at the very least, right? But the port of New York and New Jersey, just to give you an example of what we're talking about here, it's not marginal. New York and New Jersey are the busiest ports on the East Coast. They moved 7.8 million. The unit is TEU, which is 20-foot equivalent unit. It's a 20-foot cargo crate. They moved 7.8 million TEU last year. The port of Shanghai moved 49 million TEU last year. The port of Shanghai moved more cargo than every single port in America combined. All right, now when you're moving that much cargo, you need more staff and they get paid more, right? So that is a win-win situation. In Rotterdam, they automated much of their dockside work. And once again, Noah supplies a link here so you can have a look at this. There we go. We can see them doing their thing.
Yep.
Yeah, automated. That's lovely. And let me tell you about about what happened to the staffing. What happened to the staffing was over the last few years, it's increased fourfold the number of staff in Rotterdam Port because they've increased their capacity so much. And the next point Noah makes, which I think is a great point as well, is here's a little experiment. Let's go backwards.
Yes.
Let's take the technology we got now. Would you give it up? Would you give up cranes? Would you give up the forklifts? Would you give up the kind of automation that has made your job much easier? If you did, there'd be more workers. There'd be more workers there. They'd get paid less because they'd be less productive. Their life would be a misery, but there'd be more workers. Is that what we want? No one would agree to that. So why would we assume that the future wouldn't be the same? So what Noah says is that the secret here is to try to make sure that the workers have a piece of this new technology. They're not just sacked and just thrown out in the street.
Yeah.
That for a start, what they should be negotiating is any automation. First of a start, keep the same conditions they had before, which is automation doesn't cost jobs.
Yes.
That's a reasonable condition, I think, for a union.
Yep.
But also say any automation, you must train the workers that are there first to take advantage of automation. And if for whatever reason someone doesn't want to change their, like they might be 60 years old, they might not want to play computer games. You give them one hell of a payout. Let's stipulate what the payout is.
Yes.
Because you're going to make a lot of money out of this.
Yeah.
So you need to pass it on to the worker, whether it's $1 million payout or whatever. Make it a big payout.
Yes.
To give them incentive to agree to this. I reckon that like rather than fighting the future, it just seems to me to make so much more sense.
Yeah.
To just do what Noah says. What do you reckon?
Yeah. I mean, I can see what the union is afraid of. It's the idea that these older, long-time workers will be seen as less useful. They'll be worried that the Maritime Alliance will be like, okay, let's go and recruit all of the best Tetris players in the world. Find the 100 best Tetris players in the world. But I broadly agree with you, albeit this is an issue I don't really know anything about.
Fair enough. And neither do I, until I read Noah Smith's article.
Okay, yes.
Okay, Dave, go on now to the general.
Okay, so the general picture of unions in this election. The most recent polling that I've seen suggests Harris has about a 9-point lead over Trump with union households.
Yeah.
Now, that is less than what Biden had, which was 20 points. It's also less than what Clinton was polling at this point in 2016, although Clinton's lead ended up being 9% with union households as well. Union households is a bit of a frustrating measure because you can be in a union household and not be a union worker. But that is the measure that always gets used. But just to put that out there, that it's a bit of a frustrating measure. So Trump got, I think, 42% of the union household vote in 2016, 40% of it in 2020. That's kind of historically normal for a Republican. There are some who did better, like Reagan got 45%, Nixon got 54% in 1972. Those, albeit, were in electoral landslides. Some did a lot worse. George H.W. Bush did, I think, was the low point, something like 25% or something of the union household vote. So the union household vote is definitely not a locks down vote for Democrats, even if they do normally win the majority of it. Most unions were very quick to endorse Joe Biden because he's the big pro-Labor president. Most of them also very quickly shifted their endorsement to Kamala Harris.
Most.
The big exceptions are the Teamsters and the International Association of Firefighters, which did not endorse Harris, but at the same time their members did boo J.D. Vance when he turned up to talk to them.
Yes.
So, yeah. Now, it's worth talking about this because there's been more talk about unions and union workers from Republicans over the last 4 years than there probably has been, in any period since at least the 1970s. So once again, to go back into history, when I said unions were comprehensively defeated. That was largely by Republicans and by their Southern Democrat allies, who were the ones who put Taft-Hartley in place. And this is basically the modern conservative coalition crystallized around anti-union activity. And even when Republicans were getting large numbers of union voters, they were never a pro-union party, right? And they are still not. One of the reasons they did so well with unionized workers in the 1960s and 1970s was unions were incredibly anti-communist. They basically had to be as a precondition of their survival. Everyone associates the term silent majority with Richard Nixon because he used it in his 1969 speech calling for the support of the American people for the Vietnam War. And he said he believed this was the position of the silent majority. George Meany, the AFL-CIO president, said in 1967 that unionists who supported the Vietnam War, like him, were the great silent majority of the country.
Oh.
And this was one of the reasons Nixon got so much support from the unions. It was actually because of Vietnam. And one of the iconic events of this period that people always remember are the Hard Hat Riot in New York in 1970, which involved about 400 construction workers in hard hats brawling with long-haired college anti-Vietnam War protesters, which, sort of set this culture war template ever since of the good, honest, patriotic working classes sick of all of this hippie college bullshit.
Why were they brawling with them?
Over the Vietnam War, because these were Vietnam War protesters. And
but why did they care? Why did the hard hats care?
The mythology goes because the hard hats had brothers and cousins who were out there dying in the jungle, and they didn't. Now it probably was just these hard hats were pretty conservative and didn't like these hippies. Yeah. But that was the sort of mythology that it was the working classes who were going and dying in Vietnam, and then you've got these disgraceful middle class kids who all had deferments out of Vietnam because of college, protesting against them. And, Richard Nixon then went and toured New York the next day, and there were all these hard hats for Nixon hats, blah, blah, blah. But it did reflect something about the politics of the unions at the time, which is they're very, very anti-communist. Now, what that means is, and that support for Republicans did linger on for quite a while. So the Teamsters endorsed Nixon in 1972, endorsed Reagan in 1984, endorsed George H.W. Bush in 1988. And there's this kind of cultural nostalgia that Republicans can always tap into, especially with a group like the Teamsters, whose endorsement they were actively seeking this year. Mostly male union, blue collar, and to put it mildly, they've got a reputation for toughness. Okay.
Sure.
And, this is what Sean O'Brien's been all about. Like, almost getting into a fight with Mark Wayne Mullen on the floor of the Senate. So there's that cultural nostalgia that they can always appeal to, but that's not the most important nostalgic element. The most important nostalgic element is what Trump is promising economically, which is to bring all these manufacturing jobs back to the United States. To say, we're going to steal jobs from China and Germany and all of these other places. Now, we'll come back to that in just a second. I do, though, specifically want to mention J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley.
Yep.
Now, they have actually gone a step further in terms of making supportive noises about unions themselves. I will emphasize Trump does not do this. They have, they supported the UAW in the strike, but if you closely look at what they did, they were also very critical of the UAW leadership because the UAW leadership was very critical of Trump. So they, even there where they were supporting UAW workers, they still weren't exactly supporting the UAW itself, even though they have made more pro-union noises. Okay, we'll leave them aside, though, and come back to Trump, because as we keep hearing, nobody gives a shit about the vice president. It's all about Trump. Okay, so Trump, as president, had a very anti-union record. His appointees to the National Labor Relations Board consistently ruled against unions. A lot of that, Biden's appointees have spent basically 4 years undoing that. Trump, of course, also, he held an event last year for union workers at a non-union shop in Detroit. He praised Elon Musk for his willingness to sack workers who were striking, which is something that none other than Sean O'Brien described as economic terrorism. And Aaron Blake, one of our favourite journalists, recently published an article saying Trump keeps saying remarkably anti-union things.
Yeah.
Such as that he hates paying overtime.
Yes. He said that like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. He said that he's worked with unionised workforces in New York and non-unionised workforces in Florida. And boy, let me tell you, prefer the non-union ones. Like he's not really talking the union talk, let alone walking the union walk. But what he is promising is this idea that they will generate and protect millions of new jobs in industries that are traditionally associated with unions. So manufacturing, doing that through these very heavily protectionist measures, but also, of course, mining, fracking, drilling, doing that by rolling back environmental regulations and expanding all of that on federal land. And I suppose this brings me to the first of two big points. When Trump, and also to some extent when Vance and Hawley and Rubio talk about union workers, when they heap praise on union workers, they're not really talking about unions. They're talking about a particular kind of blue-collar work which they see as worthy of generating and protecting. This mostly traditionally male work in traditionally masculine industries that are all about getting stuff out of the ground and making stuff, which is a lot of people's very nostalgic idea of what the American economy should be all about. Yeah. They do not like the present reality of the fact that 70 to 80% of the US labor force is in fact in the service industries, not in manufacturing and construction and mining and all of that stuff.
So they probably don't like those Shanghai longshoremen.
They probably do not like those Shanghai longshoremen. If you dig a little bit deeper into Trump's vision, as I've said before, it's part of what Helen Milner called the economic nationalist bargain or the nationalist protectionist bargain, which is the idea that if the government really pours all of its energy and resources into protecting jobs in this way, so in other words, if tariffs basically become the major form of tax in the United States, you don't need other taxes because the government doesn't need to look after anyone anymore. It doesn't need to look after people who've been displaced by deindustrialization. You don't need a welfare state to look after communities that have been devastated by offshoring, because no, all of the jobs have come back. Just protect the jobs. You don't need to protect anything else. So you can have lower taxes as long as you've got those tariffs. Now, when you look closely at this picture, there's really no role in this for unions at all, because the jobs are created and protected by government, by industrial policy, not by industrial relations. You don't need union protection. The government provides the guarantee of your job protection through its protectionist regime. Yeah. In this picture. So the appeal is to union workers because their jobs will be protected, but it's not to unions themselves. It's basically, unions are going to be made irrelevant. Like, nonetheless, though, this is obviously very appealing to a lot of people who work in unionized industries. Yeah,
I think you make an excellent point, which I hadn't really thought of before, which is to the way these people see the politics of work. They see it as a battle between different companies.
Yes.
Like different companies on different sides of the world.
Yes.
Whereas unions are based on the idea that the social unit in work is between the employer and the employee.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. They've got a fundamentally antagonistic understanding of the economy. That the capitalist economy itself is a source of conflict. And they, unionists, certainly in the US, they're not all Marxists, but they still have a basic understanding of class conflict. That is a basic source of tension that is never going to go away. You are always going to need unions to protect the workers' side of the bargain, even if they do feel that there's a lot of scope for cooperation. In Australia, this adversarial understanding of industrial relations is basically enshrined in our whole system of politics, where one party represents Labor and the other side represents the non-Labor side. That's why there are limits on how far the Liberals will ever be able to follow Republicans in terms of economic populism. Where they can follow them is in bashing big business. Okay, and we've seen an example of this just recently with Trump threatening to cut Deloitte contracts because with the federal government, because it was someone from Deloitte who leaked the texts from JD Vance from after the 2020 election talking about what a shit job Trump had done. Now, one of the reasons why we see in relative terms, I think, over the last few years, so much big business bashing from the Republicans and increasingly from the Liberals in Australia as well, is because of the fact that publicly listed corporations have, they've embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion. They talk about their commitments to sustainability all the time. A lot of them a lot of well-known brands back causes like marriage equality, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous recognition in Australia. Conservative parties increasingly see corporations as culturally hostile to them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this bashing is fundamentally cultural. The big political shift, though, is these major corporations, publicly listed corporations, used to be, at one point, a very important source of donations for conservative parties, because conservative parties always did and still do align with these corporations on tax and regulation.
Yep.
However, what has happened since the 1980s is that dynastic wealth has created these super rich individuals and families who have massive private companies. They have become the main sources of funding to right-wing politics. So they don't need corporations anymore. Now, still in the public mind, these are the parties that are most associated with corporations and with big business. Like in Australia, there was a branding study in 2019 that found pro-big business was one of the strongest brand associations with the Liberal Party. But nonetheless, they are increasingly kind of visibly, both of these parties, sorry to bring Australian content into this, but I find the parallels very interesting. They are increasingly going after big business, and not just on cultural grounds, on consumer protection grounds as well. So, hence you have Trump's let's put a 10% limit on credit card. You have Peter Dutton in Australia suggesting government should use its divestiture power to break up supermarkets. They can do all of this because the corporations are not where their money or support is coming from anymore. It is privately held companies is where their money and support is coming from. So they can make a big display of bashing big business, even though at the end of the day, they are always going to align with big business on taxation and regulation. But the Republicans have, more of a free hand on this Labor issue because of the fact that American unions are so weak relative to Australian unions. The Australian party system gives unions a place at the table and also institutionalizes them on one side of politics. Unions in America, to maximize their power, have to actually not fully commit to one side. If they're going to have any leverage at all, they have to be able to negotiate with both sides.
Yep.
And yes, like the Teamsters are more conservative than other unions, but also what Sean O'Brien was doing was a legitimate tactic of not committing to either side in order to try to get more out of them. And in the end, he didn't get what he wanted out of them. A lot of people in the union movement will rightly be very critical that basically he overplayed his hand. He was looking for stuff he was never going to get, and he should have committed to the Democrats. But yeah, so this picture that you have of these weak, politically docile unions in America, this is why Republicans actually have a free hand to go after union workers. Like, you will never hear Liberals in Australia appealing to union workers as union workers,
Yeah.
even though, according to Andrew Lee, who's an economist and Labor Member of Parliament, apparently about a third of unionised workers in Australia, of union members in Australia, voted for the coalition parties between 1966 and 2004. So anyway, that is the picture of the role that unions could play. It could be very important when you consider that an estimated 14% of voters in those three Midwestern states are union members. The importance of a Teamsters endorsement would have been the organisational strength that would have lent to the campaign. I think and I don't quite know how the Teamsters are organised chapter-wise, but I think that the Teamsters of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin just went ahead and endorsed Harris themselves. I don't know if that was a single chapter or there was also the Black Teamsters Caucus endorsed Harris. But she does, like, the drop-off of support from Biden could be a serious issue. Like, that could be one of the issues at the end of the election is, Biden was never going to win because of his drop-off of support with the rest of the country. But the one place his support didn't drop off with was unions.
That's definitely the case. As we're seeing with what we saw with the firefighters union, they put out a statement that was reverent of Joe Biden when he left, and then they didn't support Kamala Harris.
Did not support Harris.
No, absolutely. I'm going to not spend long on this, but I want to raise the question of the Doug Emhoff allegations.
Okay.
I'll put them out there and I want to see your view on whether you think they're a legitimate story and why they're not being discussed, because they're not being discussed much.
Okay.
All right. So there's a number of allegations against Doug Emhoff, that is Kamala Harris's husband. The Daily Mail has been absolutely obsessed with the guy for months. First, they printed at the first week of August, they printed stories alleging that Emhoff cheated on his first wife back in 2008 with the nanny. And in classic Daily Mail style, they found the worst possible photo of that nanny. And they just keep on printing it over and over again. I don't know what she did to deserve this, but she would not be happy with her Google results when she looks herself up. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because it's not a great photo and they just keep running it. Anyway, so this nanny was also a teacher at his daughter's school and she got pregnant. She didn't have the baby. It's not clear if she had a miscarriage or an abortion, but she didn't have the baby.
Right.
Now, Emhoff admitted that was true, or everything I just said.
Yes.
A statement said, during my first marriage, Kirsten and I went through some tough times on account of my actions. I took responsibility, and in the years since, we worked through things as a family and have come out stronger on the other side. Yeah, I don't know if he did take responsibility, but whatever, that's his statement. He admitted to it. Okay. Then last week, there were some new allegations in the Daily Mail. That the allegations were that Emhoff assaulted a woman that he was dating in 2012. This was when he was in the process of getting divorced. He'd been dating this New York attorney for 3 months at the time, and she took him to the Foundation for AIDS Research Gala dinner near Cannes in France, one of those hoity-toity, high-class kind of dinners, an auction with Hollywood celebs and the like. One of the woman's friends says that she rang them on the night sobbing. She said, is now a quote from the woman's friend. She said she was with a guy. Her date, she was at the Cannes Film Festival, and he hit her. She was in the car with the guy at the time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to call the French police. I couldn't get a hold of her after calling back. She then, another day, told this guy, it was something like 3 a.m. They were trying to get out of there and they both had been drinking. There was a gigantic line for taxis. The woman went up to one of the valet guys, offered him 100 euros or whatever to get to the head of the line. She told me she put her hand on his shoulder. Doug apparently thought that she was flirting and came over and slapped her in the face. She slapped him back. My impression is that he had a lot to drink. She was sobbing on the phone afterwards, but she wasn't slurring her words. She told me that she broke up with him that night. Now, a second friend also was told the story by this woman. The second friend said, quote, they had dinner. She said Doug was very charming and it was lovely. Then I believe it was between 2 to 3 a.m. It was still raging, but she was wearing 4-inch heels and a floor-length gown, so it was time to depart. She said there'd been no fight before he hit her. You would have thought it was this fairy tale trip. She put her hand on the valet's shoulder, and as she was talking to him, Doug comes up. She says he turned her around by her right shoulder, and she was completely caught off guard. He hauled up and slapped her so hard she spun around. She said she was in utter shock. She was so furious, she slapped him on one side and then on the other cheek with the other hand. All of a sudden, the car was there and they were ushering her into the car. She said she wanted to go back to the hotel without him, but while she was shutting the door, he forced himself into the car, which she did not want. I think she asked him what the fuck was that all about in the car, and the only thing she could really get out of him was that he thought she was hitting on the valet. She told me she was so embarrassed, she couldn't believe he's a person that he is, and it turned into this trailer trash moment. It woke her up about the self-delusion she was having, explaining away the teacher story. She realized he was bad news. This was the first time she saw his ugly side. She said she called her male businessman friend because she wanted Doug to see her on the phone, telling somebody she felt that that would afford her some protection. And then a third friend said that the woman told her the same story in 2018.
Right.
They're the three sources of this article. Okay? What's the evidence apart from their stories? Apart from the stories of those three people, they have plenty of evidence that Emhoff was on that trip.
Yep.
They have an itinerary. They have an email from the time corroborating he was there. And they have a photo of Emhoff and the woman, obviously dating from the time. That's the extent of the evidence.
Yep.
All three friends said that Emhoff told the woman about the affair he had with a nanny. So my suspicion is that one of them might have been the Daily Mail's original source for the nanny story.
Ah, yes, yeah.
Now, my concerns about this, that's my first concern.
Yeah.
The fact the nanny story ran 2 months earlier, and I suspect they're related in their sourcing, and then they held the story for another 2 months.
Yeah.
That's a red flag for me because, look, maybe it took that long to report out the story, or maybe the Daily Mail was holding it to be as damaging as possible, releasing it in October. That's when I get a bit nervous. Stories released in October are often garbage.
Yes.
It's a bit sus that this has never come out until now, given that Emhoff and Harris have been in the public eye for 5 years. Also, it's noteworthy that the woman involved has told the Daily Mail nothing. This story was compiled from three people who did not witness the events. So even if they're all telling the truth of what they were reported, we're getting it secondhand.
Yes.
So it could be all kinds of Chinese whispers issues.
Yeah.
Right? For what it's worth, Emhoff did admit the first story, but his spokesperson denied this one. They told Semaphore the Daily Mail's report is untrue, and any suggestion he would or has ever hit a woman is false. It should also be noted that Emhoff's ex-wife has never suggested he has a tendency to be violent.
Yeah.
And they get along to this day.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, before I tell you the third story, do you have any thoughts so far?
I agree with your skepticism.
Yep. Okay. All right. So
about this. Yes.
yeah. So your major thought at the moment is you're not convinced the second story is true.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. That's where I was as well.
Yes.
Which is why we haven't talked about this until now.
Okay.
Because I thought, let's just. It might be right. It might not. Let's just leave it for now and let's just wait for more information. I knew more information would come.
Okay.
Okay. So then we get to the third story. That's this week. The Daily Mail completed their trilogy. Attorneys who work with Doug Emhoff at his former firm, a law firm, this is Venable. He worked there from 2006 to 2017. They made various claims about his behavior at work. One senior former staffer said about a female partner at the firm, quote, she had to ask him something. His office door was closed. She said to his secretary, is he on the phone? She said no. She tapped on the door. He didn't answer. So she slightly opened the door and stuck her head in. He said, get the fuck out of my office. What's worse was he bragged about it to the management at Venable and they were aghast. He's an asshole. He told them how he put her in her place. A misogynist. That's who does that. That was the first quote. A female ex-staffer said it was well known at the firm that Emhoff was, quote, very flirty, and that, quote, if you weren't flirty back or didn't respond positively, then you were on his shit list. She said the consequences of not flirting with him were that, quote, you wouldn't get to work on the cases you wanted to work on. Another woman who worked at the firm for several years said that Emhoff ran men-only drinks nights in the office. He had for many years cocktail parties where only men were invited. In the office on Friday evening, when my colleague brought that to the attention of Venable around 2010, it stopped. There was also a sex discrimination case against that firm, which wasn't about Emhoff. But as part of the sex discrimination case, the woman who was at the center of it, she was a secretary, says she was driven out of the office because the partner decided, quote, that he deserved a young, attractive secretary like his partner, Doug Emhoff, had. Her name, Katya, was office code. Katya referred to an assistant hired by Doug Emhoff, who was widely considered unqualified and hired because she was young, attractive, and friendly with the powerful men in the office. Katya also worked as a part-time as a model. That's the third story. Now, my take on that is that was a particularly weak third story. Basically gossip, as far as I can see, and not very interesting gossip.
No,
I
would say that describes the culture of like 80% of law firms.
Probably. So why did I tell you that third story? The reason why I told you that third story is because it shows the Daily Mail has got it in for Emhoff. The fact they ran with that, which really wasn't a very interesting story.
Yeah.
And that may influence your view of the second story, which to me, if it's true, is the most serious story by a fair way. So now, what are your thoughts?
This does make me more skeptical.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not to say that the Daily Mail can't publish anything valuable, but it's got a track record of never publishing anything valuable.
Yes.
Like the Daily Mail's biggest day of the year is its gallery of people passed out at the Melbourne Cup. Like,
big day.
That's Daily Mail Christmas. That I also think is basically the only original reporting that it does. The rest of the time, it just steals stories from other outlets. Like, this is its entire stock in trade now, is just online theft of other people's stories.
But it gives them much longer headlines. That's the important bit.
That's true.
Often the headline is longer than the story.
But even their Melbourne Cup gallery of people passed out is, that's stolen from people's social media feeds. So, yeah, when it comes to stories from the Daily Mail, the burden of plausibility is on the Daily Mail.
I knew by talking for a while
Yes.
about these stories. I mean, it wasn't like I was wasting time, but I knew by speaking for a while there, I'd give Dave time to think of exactly what he wanted to say about the Daily Mail, and it would be good. And he delivered. You just got to give him just a couple of minutes. You just got to let the brain tick over, and he delivers every time. Trump, unsurprisingly, is very disturbed by the fact that this story has not been covered as much as he'd like.
Oh, very disturbed.
And this is him being interviewed by Ben Shapiro.
In the past week alone, we learned from multiple witness accounts that Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris's husband, allegedly assaulted his ex-girlfriend. If that story had been about anyone even tangentially connected to your campaign, it would have been front page news every single day. Instead, it's been buried. How do you fight a legacy media that is once again rigging the informational environment of the election?
Well, for some reason, I got to watch MSDNC, which I never watched because I don't know what happened. He was being interviewed on MSDNC, which is one of the worst, really a terrible, terrible group of people. And it was like a love fest. Never asked him about that. Never asked him about the other one. He had numerous problems. Never asked him about anything. And was saying he's like a symbol for all men all over the world. It's the craziest interview I've ever seen. If that were me, it would be the greatest story in the last 5 years.
Okay, a couple of things.
Yeah.
Firstly, I love Ben Shapiro's really weak, wan, vanilla laugh at the MSDNC thing. Like Ben Shapiro's not finding this funny.
I did not know that Ben Shapiro has now joined the ranks of baby-faced right-wingers who grow beards to try to look more grown up.
Oh, he's had a beard for a while.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you're right. He has joined those ranks.
Yes.
But the second thing
was that when he moved to Tennessee?
He
wanted to try to look more like Davy Crockett.
That might be quite the coincidence. You might be onto something there, Dave. Before I throw the question at you about this, though.
Yeah.
I also just want to put in a disclaimer that
Yeah.
it's just this ongoing motif.
Yes.
Whenever Trumpists are talking about the double standards in the media, they like to talk about how many days this would be in the front page if it happened to Trump. And you just go, hang on. Have you learned anything from the Trump era of media?
Yeah.
Nothing goes for multiple days with Trump. Trump could just shoot someone in the head. It'll be the front page story one day. The next day, Trump tweeted something else.
That's right.
And they're like, nothing is multiple days front page with Trump, no matter what the situation.
A story about Trump being sexist in the office wouldn't be the biggest story of the last 5 years because it wouldn't be bigger than the story about him being found liable for sexual assault.
No, it's not.
It wouldn't
That's
be
right.
bigger than the story about the fact that it is not defamatory to call him a rapist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, no, these would not be the biggest stories of the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's fair to say Trump dreams of this being the biggest problem he has with women.
Yes.
But anyway, let me throw the question at you, though.
Yes.
Are they right that at the very least, if this was involving Trump, this would be a bigger story than it is with Doug Emhoff, which is basically unmentioned outside the Daily Mail?
No, I don't think it would be because the luridness of the standards that we're so used to means that it just wouldn't. Trump has just brought back somebody who was convicted of assaulting a woman, Corey Lewandowski.
That's true.
Not a story.
Not even the Daily Mail.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, I do not give any credence to that. Do you remember, like, the pathetic occasions on which Ben Shapiro has actually tried to push back against Trump and Trumpism?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah.
He didn't push
No,
back
it's
very
just,
hard.
no, he didn't. He doesn't really have it in him.
Yeah, just for what it's worth, I think I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, I'm not sure it'd be exactly the same, but I mean, we just need to be clear as well that Doug Emhoff is not Kamala Harris.
No.
If this was Kamala Harris, it'd be a bigger story.
Yeah.
If Kamala Harris was a man,
Kamala Harris is going around slapping people.
Yeah. If Kamala Harris was
in
a man,
cans.
well, I was say if Kamala Harris was a man and slapping people,
Yeah.
it would have been a bigger story again.
Yes. Okay. And, like, let me just clarify here. If that second story is true, it's bad. Because not only is that violent behavior, it's moronic behavior.
Yeah.
Like you were flirting with the valet because you put your hand on his shoulder. Yeah. But I am a long way from seeing sufficient evidence of that story.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
I continue to want,
especially since the victim hasn't actually said anything to the
Yes.
Daily Mail about it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that is a big red flag for me.
Yep.
Once again, I'm not saying that nothing happened. I'm just saying when all you are hearing is secondhand stories.
Yes.
It's just likely to be less reliable than if you're hearing a firsthand story.
Yep. Especially when you're hearing it through the Daily Mail.
Yes. So anyway, look, I'm inclined to agree with you. Whether it would be marginally bigger if it was involving say JD Vance, something like that, then like it may be, but I don't think it'll be much bigger. And JD Vance is wrong. The problem is it's the spouse.
Yes.
Like it's like there's all these weird gender things, right?
Yeah.
But if it's this, like, people don't talk about Melania and all.
If it was Jared Kushner.
Yeah, okay.
This is the closest we can get.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
This is the closest we can get.
That's good. That's good.
If it's Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
I personally can't imagine Jared Kushner slapping anyone.
It wouldn't, but if he did, it would not be the biggest story of the last 5 years.
No.
It really wouldn't.
Slapping someone who wasn't Ivanka Trump. If he slapped Ivanka Trump, that would be a big story. But if the story was about him slapping a previous girlfriend, wouldn't be a big story.
Yeah, and if Jared Kushner spoke, that would be the biggest story of the last 5 years. But if he slapped someone, it would not be.
Yeah.
And also, I continue to have serious doubts about that story. Anyway, so we've had our little philosophical discussion. You want to talk Eric Adams?
I do want to talk about Eric Adams because we haven't really talked about him on PEP. I don't know if you've talked about him on Planet America.
No, we have talked about Planet America a little bit, but Bill talked to him about on PEP when you were away. But Bill basically just lavished. He luxuriated in the hilarity of some of the stories.
Yes,
he wasn't really focusing on the details so much as how hilarious some of the excuses and stories going around.
Well, the stories are fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I assume he's already covered he was getting so much largesse from Turkish Airlines that he asked if it was possible to book a flight to Easter Island via Istanbul.
He did mention that.
For any peppers planning their holidays, no, it is not.
He did mention that.
He
He did mention the quote, I think, all flights go through Istanbul. He did mention that. He did mention the enormous number of phones that have been taken as
now,
well.
the payoff to Turkish interests, I don't know if he mentioned this, is hilarious but also disturbing, which was that the Turkish government opened a 37-story building in New York, consular building, and leaned on Eric Adams to provide it with fire safety certification in time for Recep Tayyip Erdogan's visit, when it was apparently not fire safe, according to people who know fire safety.
Yeah, the indictment asserts that it definitely would not have passed a fire safety
Yes,
check.
yeah. So this is bad stuff. Okay, Bill's already luxuriated.
But that's okay. It's okay. This is weeks ago. You say what you want to say. That's fine.
Let's just talk a bit more about Eric Adams, the man. Okay, so Eric Adams became mayor of New York in 2021.
Yeah.
It really needs to be emphasized how closely he scraped in. He only made it to he got to the runoff in the primaries with 21% of the vote, beating out someone else with 20% of the vote. Then he won the primary 51 to 49. Now, of course, the Democratic primary is what matters at this point in New York City, and the Republican candidate was a bit of a joke. But Eric Adams was widely lauded as this move to the right from Democrats. Because here's this tough black cop who is talking tough on law and order. He doesn't go along with any of this defund the police shit. He's a tough guy. Albeit one who had police reform credentials in his background. So all of the usual suspects absolutely loved this. Because, the previous New York mayor had been Bill de Blasio, who was definitely on the left of the Democratic Party and was very focused on income inequality. So this was definitely a move to the right. And so people who were really concerned that Democrats were alienating everyone by being too far left, people who remember defund the police as being a much bigger thing than it actually was, they absolutely loved Eric Adams. The famous tweet that's been circulating, of course, was Nate Silver saying that he was the future presidential contender of the Democratic Party. Yeah. The Bulwark really loved him. But from the beginning, he was one hell of a dud. Right? It's been pointed out that his highest approval ratings right at the beginning of his term were barely higher than de Blasio's lowest approval ratings at the end of his term, where de Blasio's approval ratings were pretty low by the end of his second term.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a good idea that de Blasio's ratings were low. I didn't realize Eric Adams was that low.
Yeah, so Eric Adams in December of 2023 had the lowest approval rating ever recorded by Quinnipiac for a New York mayor.
Do you remember the number?
13%.
I had no idea.
Yes, yeah. So they've been going since no. It was only 13% wanted him to run for re-election. His approval rating was a bit higher. There was 26%.
Oh, okay. Well, that's sky high.
Yeah, 26%. Was they've been running that since 1996.
Yeah.
So he was not a popular guy.
No.
He was. He really wanted to present himself as a celebrity. He was constantly out clubbing. He had a penchant for sayings which he clearly thought were really clever but were quite idiotic. One that one of my favorite sites, Defector, seized on all the time was he kept saying things like college graduations, let your haters be your waiters at the table of success.
Okay. That rhymes.
Let your haters be your waiters at the table of success. But okay.
To be fair.
Yeah.
He was a celebrity.
He was.
He was a movie star.
Yes.
Yes.
Play the clip.
This is from the Turkish film Masali.
Hocam, benim apartmana bir ek kat çıkabilir miyiz? Bize bir yol yordam göstersen.
Saygıdeğer başkanım, kıymetli Erik Efendi. Alt sokağa bir dönerci dükkanı açalım dedik. Kıçımıza kaçmaya yılan kalmadı. Sizden ruhsatını rica edebilir miyim?
You guys are from Turkey. Brooklyn loves Turkey. Brooklyn is the Istanbul of America. We love your food, we love your music, but I don't understand Turkish. We can take a selfie, though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a natural. So it does explain one thing, though, that clip from that film. It explains why he kept on going to Istanbul, because he thought it was Brooklyn.
Yes.
That's why.
That's right. Anyway, high quality stuff. Now, he at one point referred to himself as Brooklyn's Biden.
Okay.
Like, he was really, early on in his mayoral career, he was really currying Biden's favor. Now, that relationship deteriorated.
Yeah, sure.
Because he was blaming Biden for the strain that migrants were putting on resources in New York City. And quite predictably, when these charges came down, quite a lot of MAGA world was saying, like, this is because he told the truth. He told the truth about Biden's disastrous border policies. Now they're going after him. And, Trump sent a supportive tweet. Yes?
Trump said this.
Trump said this.
Watched about a year ago when he talked about how the illegal migrants are hurting our city and the federal government should pay us and we shouldn't have to take them. And I said, you know what? He'll be indicted within a year. And I was exactly right, because that's what we have. We have people that use the Justice Department and the FBI at levels that have never been seen before. So I wish him luck. I don't know anything about what he did, but...
And by the way, he said it as well.
Yes.
This is what he said.
It is now my belief that the federal government intends to charge me with crimes. If so, these charges will be entirely false, based on lies. But they would not be surprising. I always knew that if I stood my ground for all of you, that I would be a target, and a target I became.
Isn't it terrible luck for the people that every time someone fights for them, it turns out they become a criminal? It's only criminals that seem to fight for people in politics, it seems.
Exactly, yeah. So now New York Republicans are in this awful position where here's like the gift that they've been waiting for.
Yeah.
This mayor who's now really unpopular in all of these seats that are going to decide who controls the House of Representatives, and they can't go after him.
Because they've got to act like he's a victim.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they can. They're talking more broadly about culture of corruption in the Democrats or culture of corruption in New York. But he's kind of got Trump's protection at the moment. If I were Eric Adams, I'd want to get convicted as soon as possible and hope that Trump gets elected so that he can pardon me as soon as possible. Okay. Now, people who've been following this story, they already know all those details. What new information can I actually bring to the table here?
Yes.
Okay, I think I got something.
Yes.
So, Eric Adams at one point tried to style himself as the hip-hop mayor.
Yes.
Eric Adams may be too young or just too New Yorkish to know who originally called himself the hip-hop mayor.
Please tell me it's Giuliani.
It's not Giuliani. Okay, I'm about to go into a tangent treehouse that is also a Michigan corner.
Wow. We'll have to play them both at the same time, Rocky. This is going to be a first. Yeah.
The year is 2002 in Detroit. A 31-year-old scion of a Detroit political family, Kwame Kilpatrick, wins the mayoral election, defeating Gil Hall. Do you know who Gil Hall is?
No, I don't.
He is a former Detroit police officer who also played Sergeant Todd in Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, my God.
So quite quite a recognizable figure.
Yeah. So he's like the Eric Adams of the 80s.
Yes,
a big movie star.
But anyway, he leaves the story at this point because he lost that election.
Yeah.
He was quite old as well at that point, whereas Kwame Kilpatrick was the youngest mayor in the history of Detroit, 31 years old. Okay, Kwame Kilpatrick called himself the hip hop mayor. Like a lot more than Eric Adams did.
Yeah.
This is at the point 2002 when hip hop was replacing the auto industry as the major export industry of Detroit.
Yes.
From the beginning, it was very clear that Kwame Kilpatrick enjoyed a kind of a hip hop lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like one of his first acts was to use city funds to lease a Lincoln Navigator for the use of himself and his family.
Yes.
In 2002, there was apparently a wild party at the Manoogian Mansion, which is the Detroit mayor's official residence, where his wife came home to find this party involving a lot of strippers. She assaulted one of the strippers. That stripper was found murdered about a month later with her boyfriend.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty hip hop lifestyle that we're talking about.
Can
here.
I ask, do mayors in America, and in particular Detroit, do they get the same kind of mayoral robes and chains that they do in Australia? Because that big gold necklace, that's very hip hop.
Yeah. Look, I never saw him wearing one, but yeah. Anyway. Look, you can probably tell where this story is going.
Yeah.
Okay, Kwame Kilpatrick was incredibly corrupt. Like very, very corrupt.
Yeah.
He employed something like 29 family members and close friends in key roles in the city government.
Sure.
Water and sewage contracts was just an open cesspool of corruption during his years in Detroit.
Yeah.
What?
In many ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
He also, he had a lot of extramarital affairs.
Yeah.
There's one that he denied having with one of his staff, and then someone got sacked as a result of exposing it. That later turned out, yes, there were 30,000 sexual text messages exchanged between them on city phones.
Shaggy probably told them to say it wasn't him. Yes.
Anyway, so he ended up getting charged, I think, in 2000. He won the 2006 election.
He got re-elected?
He got re-elected.
Okay.
So 2000. This was before most of the bad stuff came out. There was some pretty bad stuff out there, like the dead stripper. But
Sure.
So in 2006, he defeated this candidate called Freeman Hendricks. Freeman Hendricks was expected to win. He was doing well in the polls, but I remember the ad because I was living in the Detroit media market at the time. I remember the ads. The ads were saying Kwame Kilpatrick was being subjected to a media lynching at the hands of Freeman Hendricks, and actually showing pictures of lynching victims.
Okay.
Like nothing metaphorical about this. Like let's just bring out the lynching pictures.
Sure.
When he was really under pressure in 2008, he gave his 7th State of the City address talking about the racist victimization of him and using the N-word.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And Jennifer Granholm, who was the governor at the time, Michigan's Attorney General, said, who were both white, said use of the N-word is never acceptable.
Yeah, I guess after Shaggy told him to say it wasn't him, then Public Enemy told him how to deal with the speech.
Yeah. So it was kind of the beginning of the end.
It would have been, yeah.
At this point. So I think he was convicted 3 times. The 3rd time, he got sent down for 28 years. And earliest possibility of parole was 2037, by which time he would have been 63 years old. But on his last day in office, he was pardoned by President Trump, who attested to the fact that in his 7 years in prison, he'd been leading a Baptist Bible study. Anyway,
do we have any sense of why Trump actually pardoned him?
because Trump's got an interest in making sure that people who go to jail for corruption, if they've had a political career, get pardoned. Same reason he pardoned Ron Blagojevich. Anyway, this this whole thing had a pretty devastating effect on Detroit.
Yeah.
It meant, so the next mayor, Dave Bing. So Dave Bing had been a hero of the Detroit Pistons. He was basically a powerless figure because from day one, Rick Snyder actually handed over most of the powers of the mayor to a state-appointed administrator. And there was nothing the mayor could do. And Dave Bing was so powerless, he supported this. He's like, yeah, great idea. Yes. Yeah, Dave Bing described his job as removing as many barriers as possible and getting out of the way. He was talking about getting out of the way of Dan Gilbert. So Dan Gilbert is the founder of Quicken Loans, which I think has been renamed Rocket Loans. He's from Detroit originally. But at that point, when he came back to Detroit, he was actually best known as the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the Cleveland Cavaliers were the perennial playoff rival to the Detroit Pistons. So in 2010, LeBron James left had been the whole basis of how successful the Cavaliers were, not just in their performance, but in terms of how popular they were. He notoriously made this televised decision to leave for the Miami Heat, take his talents to South Bend. Not South Bend. He wasn't going to hang out with Mayor Pete. To South Beach in Miami. Dan Gilbert posts this utterly unhinged letter to the Cavaliers website saying, to the fans of Cleveland and Northeastern Ohio, well, our hometown hero has just deserted the region that he grew up in. This narcissistic, cowardly betrayal. Well, I promise you the rest of the hardworking staff of the Cavaliers are never going to betray you. And he wrote in all caps, I guarantee the Cavaliers will win a championship before the self-proclaimed former king ever wins one. Of course, that didn't happen.
No.
The Cavaliers didn't win a championship until LeBron James actually came back after winning 2 in Miami. This letter was written in Comic Sans. I cannot describe how deranged it was. Reputable media outlets described it as insane. The Wall Street Journal asked his staff about it. They said, oh yeah, he always writes all his communications in Comic Sans, has been doing so for years. Anyway, just all to make the point that Kwame Kilpatrick left Detroit in such a state that basically this is who the city was handed over to when it went bankrupt and the mayor had no power at all. Dan Gilbert was basically allowed to buy the entirety of downtown. He bought 95 buildings downtown, had millions of acres of real estate, hired his own security force to protect it, who were completely separate from the police, basically built his own light rail line. He basically, a lot of people say he's been good for Detroit. He brought 4,000 workers into Detroit because he brought Quicken Loans there, albeit that's put, rental pressure on the city. And he certainly helped to preserve the historic downtown. But the whole idea, this is what Kwame Kilpatrick basically opened Detroit up to, was allowing it to be bought by one of the richest people in the Midwest.
So in conclusion, Eric Adams is not the hip-hop mayor.
Eric Adams is not the hip-hop mayor. But it is very, very funny that he tried to claim that title. My suspicion is he's got no idea who Kwame Kilpatrick actually was. Kwame Kilpatrick is not a very well-known figure outside of Michigan. But anyway, that is your Michigan Corner for this week.
That was brilliant. Well done, Dave. Okay, all I'm going to say about Eric Adams, because Bill never actually even got to this. For people who actually care about the story, we should actually say what the charges are.
Oh, boring.
So let's rattle through them quickly.
Okay.
5 counts. Count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, solicit foreign contributions, and accept bribes. That's worth 5 years jail. What that's referring to is Adams is accused of setting up an illicit system to accept foreign donations as part of his mayoral campaign, of accepting the plane tickets, which we've heard plenty about on Air Turkey or whatever it's called, and luxury travel perks from the Turkish government and business types.
Can I just say, just before you go on, I want to know how it was that these Turkish interests identified Eric Adams as like here's our guy?
I got no idea.
Because it began before he became the mayor.
Yeah.
Right? This was where, like, how do they identify him as someone who would be useful to them in the future? As I say, he only got 21% of the primary vote.
Yeah.
Like, it's a bizarrely well-placed bet that they made.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't become president, but he went pretty far.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a good, I mean, they're obviously good at their bribing.
Yeah. We'll come back to the presidential point finally, I think, after you've gone through all of this. Yes.
Okay. So basically, this is the conspiracy to accept bribes to help the Turkish consulate out and all that kind of stuff. Count 2 is the wire fraud count. That's 20 years jail.
Mm-hmm.
What that's referring to is in New York City, you're allowed to get public money for your campaign by matching small dollar donations. And in fact, you can get more than the small dollar donations. Adams solicited fake donations from straw donors. He knew they were straw donors. He knew they were fake donors in his 2021 and 2025 campaigns. And it was to the tune of getting $10 million worth of publicly matched payments. So he defrauded New York of $10 million of public payments with these donations he knew he couldn't get. So some of them are foreigners. It's like they got from a number of different sources, but they got the goods on them on that one, that's for sure. Then count 3 and 4 are the solicitation of foreign contributions, which is knowingly taking donations from Turkish nationals. You're not allowed to do that if you're an American politician. And count 5 is bribery, which is worth 10 years. Oh, sorry, the solicitation of foreign contributions is worth 5 years each. Bribery is worth 10 years. That's the charge related to Adams actually exchanging travel benefits, the expensive plane tickets, in return for relaxing the regulatory requirements for the Turkish consulate building that Dave referred to. Okay, so that's what the 5 charges were. I just want to note that some of them are more obvious than others. Like the wire fraud, I reckon they've got a pretty strong case looking at the indictment. I can't see him getting out of that one.
Mm-hmm.
The bribery, interestingly, even though you'd think that would be really obvious, it's actually not an easy one. And it's not an easy one because even though we know for a fact he took these perks.
And didn't someone say to him literally the words, "Now it's your turn"?
Yes, absolutely. And we're talking big perks. He paid $600 for a $7,000 room, and he didn't report for like years and years and years. He didn't report any of these gifts to the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board, which also you're supposed to do. The quote you're looking for there is in a phone call to I was read the actual indictment. On or about September 5, 2021, the Turkish official began asking Adams both directly and through the Adams staffer to intervene with the commissioner of the FDNY in order to secure a temporary certificate of occupancy for the Turkish house. Adams, the Turkish official, and the Adams staffer discussed these requests through phone calls and electronic messages. In a phone call to the Adams staffer, the Turkish official stated that because Turkey had supported Adams, it was now his turn to support Turkey. The Adams staffer relayed this message to Adams, and Adams responded, "I know."
That sounds a bit quid pro quo-y to me.
It does, but the problem is that there's now an ambiguity in the Supreme Court because of the recent cases. That if at the time you take the money or the prize, you don't know what you're taking it for, then it's not necessarily a bribe. I know. We've talked about this situation before. It's very frustrating. So even when you're being paid like in a paper bag cash, and you don't know what it's for, it not necessarily for an official function. It could be for something of any kind. You don't know. You have no idea. And then later they say, "Can you do that for me? You owe me." And you say yes. You didn't take the money necessarily for that action because that action came later. The idea for the action came later, so it's not necessarily a bribe. Once again, I know, to quote Eric Adams, but it's ridiculous. But that's how bribery now works, thanks to the Supreme Court in the last few years. So it's not at all clear that he'll go down for bribery. Wire fraud, I reckon he's going down. And that one is 20 years. So
Yeah.
that's one he really doesn't want to go down for.
Yes.
But anyway, so look, that's the key legal kind of stuff. And I know Bill read summarized both these, but I just want to read from the indictment because I think it's funnier from the indictment.
Yes.
The two funniest moments, which Bill did refer to both of them.
Mm.
One, on November the 6th, 2023, FBI agents executed a search warrant for the electronic devices used by Eric Adams,
Good.
the defendant. Although Adams was carrying several electronic devices, including 2 cell phones, he was not carrying his personal cell phone, which is the device he used to communicate about the conduct described in this indictment. When Adams produced his personal cell phone the next day in response to a subpoena, it was locked, such that the device required a passport to open. Adams claimed that after he learned about the investigation into his conduct, he changed the password on November the 5th, 2024, and increased, that's a sick, it should be 2023, and increased the complexity of his password from 4 digits to 6 digits. Adams had done this, he claimed, to prevent members of his staff from inadvertently or intentionally deleting the contents of his phone because, according to Adams, he wished to preserve the contents of his phone due to the investigation. But Adams further claimed he had forgotten the password he had just set and thus was unable to provide the FBI with a password that would unlock the phone. That was story 1. And story 2 from the indictment. The Adams staffer also agreed to speak with FBI agents and falsely denied the criminal conduct of herself and Adams, amongst others. At one point during her voluntary interview, the Adams staffer excused herself to a bathroom and while there deleted the encrypted messaging applications she had used to communicate with Adams, the promoter, the Turkish official, the airline manager, and others. I love those 2 quotes. I just want to share them.
So good.
And whatever else you want to say,
Absolute genius. So, he was talked about as a presidential prospect. I've got no doubt he would have tried to run for president.
Yep.
Even given his historic unpopularity.
Yep.
I can't think of any example of a mayor who has ever made it to the top of a presidential ticket. Now, I could be wrong. There could be people who have some mayoral background, but I can't think of anyone. Plenty of governors, certainly, but no mayors. I mean, Sarah Palin had been mayor of Wasilla and got to be a vice presidential candidate, but she'd also been governor of Alaska. Mayor Pete of South Bend gave it a red hot go in the primaries, but you know, never climbed the mountain. Apart from Mayor Pete, it only seems to be mayors from New York who have the level of self-belief required to think that they can run for president, who think I'm a big enough celebrity to run for president. So we've had Giuliani, who still holds the record for most amount of money pissed away for the fewest delegates. We've got Bloomberg, who of course holds the absolute record for most money pissed away total. And we've got de Blasio, who was already on the downswing of his popularity in New York when he decided I can take this show national. I've got to say, Eric Adams would have been a fine addition to all of those men.
He may still.
He may still.
Yes. I got a quick section here.
Yep.
On the Supreme Court ghost guns case.
Yes.
Yep. And then I'll leave it to you what we do from there, Dave. If anything.
Okay.
Because we're honing in on 3 hours.
Okay.
Doesn't mean we can't go past it, but I'll leave it up to you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Garland versus Vanderstock is a case. Just to be clear, there are no Second Amendment issues in this case. Okay. We're about to talk about guns. Ghost guns, which are the guns which come in a kit that you then make yourself. Often, people argue about how easy they are to make. Some people say you just drill one hole. It takes less than an hour. You got yourself a gun. Others say it's actually harder than you think. But whatever, it's close to a gun in the kit, right? No Second Amendment issues. You can definitely ban these under even Justice Thomas's interpretation of the Second Amendment, because ghost guns are not commonly used, and that was the key element of the Bruin case. If they're commonly used, you can't ban them. But if they're not commonly used, you can ban them if you want. So there's no Second Amendment issues here. The question is, was the Biden administration's requirement for selling ghost guns consistent with the Gun Control Act of 1968? Let me explain what the requirement was. There was a rule that the ATF, it's alcohol, tobacco, firearms, that in April 2022, the ATF had a rule that to sell a ghost gun, you need to treat it like any other gun, essentially. And what that means is the seller needs a federal license. They need to conduct background checks, and the parts need to be remarked with serial numbers, like a gun does. Okay. The new rule applied the requirements to any kits or nearly complete frames or receivers that can be readily converted into a firearm. So you can sell ghost guns, but in a much less ghostly way. Now, imagine a kid with a sheet over them, like that kind of, like not very ghostly, right? The question is though, because the whole point of ghost guns is that they have serial numbers, they can't be traced, you can do whatever you like with them. That's why they're ghost guns. The question is, does the ATF have the power to regulate them as guns? The Gun Control Act's definition of a firearm covers, quote, any weapon, including a starter gun, which will or is designed to or may readily be converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. It also covers the frame or receiver of any such weapon, which to me sounds like they're covered. Do you agree?
I agree.
Okay. All right. So let's get into what happened here. The Fifth Circuit struck down that rule. The Supreme Court temporarily blocked the Fifth Circuit's ruling last year and sent the case back down to the lower courts. And they politely suggested the courts should reconsider their original ruling. And of course, the Fifth Circuit ignored the Supreme Court because that's how they roll. So now it's back to the Supreme Court again. Solicitor General Pellegore said that because of easy-to-assemble kits and frames and receivers that require minimal work to be made functional, our nation has seen an explosion in crimes with ghost guns. Enter Justice Alito. His line of argument is that disassembled products are not really the product.
Here's a blank pad, and here's a pen. All right, is this a grocery list?
I don't think that that's a grocery list, but the reason for that is because there are a lot of things you could use those products for to create something other than a grocery list.
All right,
and so it's not like they're...
If I show you, I put out on a counter some eggs, some chopped up ham, some chopped up pepper and onions. Is that a Western omelet?
No, because again, those items have well-known other uses to become something other than an omelet. The key difference here is that these weapon parts kits are designed and intended to be used as instruments of combat, and they have no other conceivable use. And I think the further evidence comes from the fact that respondents themselves agreed that a disassembled gun qualifies as a weapon. So this is on page 37
okay, so
of the
that's
Sanders
helpful.
Act.
So your definition is a group of components that can readily be converted into something and have no other use. They must have no other use in order to constitute that thing.
Okay, so it's not like Alito was being obnoxious there. He accepted...
I thought he was.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I thought he was being obnoxious. He was trying to be clever. He's not even pretending to be a judge anymore. And he got completely destroyed.
Oh, yeah. Like, just to be clear, I think his examples were terrible.
Yes.
And I think Pellegore absolutely just smacked him.
Yeah.
But maybe you don't listen to enough Alito. He gets a lot more obnoxious than that.
So it's not it's not putting an upside down American flag outside his house, but it's still pretty obnoxious.
But yeah, anyway, she dealt with him pretty easily.
Yes.
Right? Then Justice Barrett came over the top with, I would have thought, a fairly obvious point.
Okay.
General Prelogar, I just want to follow up on Justice Alito's question about the omelet. Would your answer change if you ordered it from HelloFresh and you got a kit and it was like turkey chili, but all of the ingredients are in the kit?
Yes, and I think that presses on the more apt analogy here, which is that we are not suggesting that scattered components that might have some entirely separate and distinct function could be aggregated and called a weapon in the absence of this kind of evidence that is their intended purpose and function. But if you bought, from Trader Joe's some omelet making kit that had all of the ingredients to make the omelet and maybe included whatever you would need to start the fire in order to cook the omelet and had all of that objective indication that that's what's being marketed and sold, we would recognize that for what it is. And it doesn't stretch plain English to say, I bought omelets at the store if you bought all of the ingredients that were intended and designed to make them.
And can we just say that the United States Study Centre endorses HelloFresh in line with Justice Barrett? Now, everyone knows that, I think that was a pretty good point. That you're going to buy an omelette-making kit.
Yeah.
That's a bit more relevant.
Yeah.
But although even though I agree with the point, and I'm a bit of a fan of Justice Barrett, I actually think they missed the most obvious example.
What's that?
A much better analogy. I don't want to criticize the court here, but there's a much better analogy out there, which is if you buy a desk at IKEA, it comes in a box and you need to put it together.
Yes.
And those parts are useless for anything but making a desk from IKEA.
Yes.
When you buy a desk from IKEA, does it sound weird that you said, I bought a desk from IKEA?
No, it doesn't.
Everyone says, I bought a desk from IKEA.
Yes.
These ghost guns are like an IKEA gun.
Yes.
You put it together, except for they're much closer to the finished product than an actual IKEA product.
Yes.
So actually,
a desk from IKEA is 69 steps.
There you go.
I've done it.
I believe that they are the actual number of steps.
Yes.
So you have a good memory.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point is I should be on the Supreme Court. But leaving that aside, I think my analogy is much better. But anyway, that's the argument that Barrett came in and dealt with Alito's argument.
Mm-hmm.
Then at that point in time, Roberts jumps in and he seems to have made up his mind as well on the side of Barrett. Roberts asked Patterson, who is the attorney for the gun guys.
Yes.
I think a pretty obvious question as well, which is, if this isn't a gun, this kit, then what's the point of the kit? And this is the answer.
What is the purpose of selling a receiver without the holes drilled in it?
Well, there's some individuals, just like some individuals enjoy working on their car every weekend, some individuals want to construct their own firearms. So the purpose of selling it is to allow.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is to assist and provide individuals with material with which they can do that.
Well, I mean, drilling a hole or two, I would think doesn't give the same sort of reward that you get from working on your car on the weekend.
Hats off to Justice Roberts. I've had my problems with him, but that was quite funny.
That was pretty good, yeah.
So super disingenuous answer from the attorney there. That's for hobbyists rather than for people who want guns without license numbers. But, and the Solicitor General dealt with that pretty easily as well.
If there is a market for these kits for hobbyists, they can be sold to hobbyists. You just have to comply with the requirements of the Gun Control Act. Someone who is lawfully allowed to possess a firearm and wants to build it can purchase that kit if they undergo a background check. And so if there is a market for these products, they can operate under the statute. The evidence shows that actually the market for ghost guns essentially collapsed after this rule was permitted to go into effect, which I think just underscores what was evident all along. The reason why you want a ghost gun is specifically because it's unserialized and can't be traced.
Yeah, so the hobbyists didn't want to follow their hobby as soon as they need to get a background check and have serial numbers on their hobby, which is also a fair point. Anyway, so it looks like Barrett and Roberts at least are on the side of the Liberals. I mean, you don't need me to tell you the Liberals were against ghost guns. Right, so that's 5. So I think this case is going down.
Yes.
I suspect also Roberts wasn't loving the Fifth Circuit shenanigans. I don't think he likes them very much. But Patterson, the attorney for the gun guys, he argued there's a slippery slope here. And I'll spill out the argument. He said, he described what he called the machine gun problem, which is if anything that can be readily converted to something else should be treated like that's something else, you can drill a single hole in a semi-automatic receiver to make a machine gun receiver. So does that mean that we should treat AR-15s like machine guns for regulation purposes?
From my personal point of view, yes.
I'm sure that wouldn't bother you, Dr.
That
Dave.
would actually be pretty good, wouldn't it? The gun that's used in every mass shooting, whose only purpose is to kill large numbers of people, maybe there shouldn't be 70 million of those in circulation.
I'm sure that wouldn't bother you, but I think he knew that might bother Justice Roberts.
Because if you say, in the machine gun provision, a frame or receiver is also regulated. And if one hole is all that separates a semi-automatic receiver from a machine gun receiver, it's hard to see how the readily standard would not also be applied there. I welcome the court's questions.
And the Solicitor General slapped that down pretty easily as well. She said that the product needs to be unfinished before it's converted. If it's already a finished product like the AR-15, then sure, it's an AR-15.
Yes.
If it's unfinished nothing until you convert it, then yes, the thing that's about to be converted isn't complete until you finish converting it. It's not something else. And if it's slightly unfinished, that fits the definition of the second object perfectly, she said.
So I want to be really clear about our interpretation of the statute. We are not suggesting that a statutory reference to one thing includes all other separate and distinct things that might be readily converted into the thing that's listed in the statute itself. So the example we give in our reply brief is that a pair of pants is not regulated as a pair of shorts if you have a statute referring to shorts, even though the pants could be readily converted into shorts. That's because pants are a distinct object in their own right and they have a separate identity. And the rule itself incorporates this principle by requiring that the regulated object, before you even get to a readily analysis, has to be clearly identifiable as the unfinished component part of the regulated weapon. So what that means is you would have to say this thing is a clearly unfinished component part of a machine gun, a weapon that's designed to fire automatically more than one shot with a single function of the trigger. But you couldn't say that about an AR-15. That is obviously something that's designed and intended to be used for semi-automatic fire. And the fact that you might be able to undertake certain drilling and machining operations to convert it into a machine gun doesn't mean that while it has this separate identity and is standing alone, it would be regulated as a machine gun. The agency has never held otherwise. This is the same interpretation that the agency has had all along, and it has never suggested that AR-15 standing alone are regulated machine guns. If you are missing a single hole, then you can clearly recognize that as an unfinished component part of a weapon, and it is readily convertible to function, and that fits within the plain dictionary definition of what a frame or receiver is understood to be, no different than a bicycle missing pedals or a tennis racket that is sold unstrung.
And then finally, there's Kavanaugh, who's a little bit on the fence. He expressed some concerns about gun sellers being ignorant of the law, unwittingly selling a kit, and then getting busted for not having to running a background check. The Solicitor General said the law actually requires them to be a willful breaker of the law, so it doesn't really apply. He seemed to accept that. Will that be enough to win his vote? I don't know. So it might be 6-3, it might be 5-4, but I'm pretty sure these ghost guns are going away.
I would, and as they should. I mean, it just really seems like a very obvious thing.
It does, doesn't it?
I don't know. Like it to me, it's so obvious that it just doesn't need to even be developed any further.
Well, I did it anyway.
Yes.
Okay, Dave. The things that you had left over, you wanted to say something about Elon Musk for like the 12th pod in a row.
I'm just reminded, because I hear Elon Musk's voice so rarely. I hear him and actually see him so rarely. I'm just reminded of how incredibly uncharismatic he is.
Yeah,
like it's just amazing to see him up there. And fight.
Yeah.
Like, can you actually get a worse spokesperson?
I mean, I'm kind of torn because, the accent's part of it, but also part of it is he's a bit spectrumy, I kind of beating up on my brother a bit there. So I'm a bit torn to go in for just having that weird monotone and speaking that clipped fashion and being kind of like Dwight Schrute. Like I'm kind of like, but I mean, you're right. He's not very charismatic. It's true.
If it was a normal person as opposed to someone who's pouring billions of dollars into trying to get Donald Trump reelected and who is actively spreading misinformation about the hurricane.
There is that.
Telling people that FEMA is confiscating people's resources. Yeah, maybe I would be more inclined to let this stuff go. But anyway.
Let's not. There was a... about Musk, actually. I'll just see your thought on this. Is an interesting one. Jared from last week, by the way, I was saying about whether it was questioning the $1 billion per year loss thing.
Yeah.
He said he looked it up. He said he was just approximating. He looked it up. It said there's a $456 million loss in the first quarter of 2023. So it's really $2 billion per year. But also, he noted that X has lost $30 billion, 80% of its asset value from the $44 billion price Musk paid in 2023. That's not the interesting. I mean, that is interesting, but that's not the interesting one. The one I want to throw to you is from Other Sean, who says, I see Musk following a similar path to Howard Hughes, not Rupert Murdoch. The Hughes Aerospace companies develop missiles and space probes for the US government. Keep a close watch on Elon's fingernails for early signs of the end.
That is a good point.
It's interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely buy that. Because, Murdoch always, his big thing was he was, despite the fact he came from quite significant privilege, he understood what the people wanted. He was a man of the people. Also really able to talk to people. Musk is none of these things. Musk comes out to a Trump rally wearing a black MAGA hat with black text on it and says, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA.
Yes.
What percentage of people in that crowd appreciate that? Like, it's small.
Yeah, it's small.
It's small.
Yeah. He's a creature of the online.
He really is a creature
and that
of
crowd and not
of
online.
the online.
They're
JD Vance would have liked it.
Yeah, he would have loved it.
He would have. I think he was there.
Libs of TikTok would have loved it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was one of the many points where the crowd didn't seem to be that into what he was saying.
Okay, so Dave, you definitely past 3 hours. Do you want to stick around for a 5 to 10 minute policy time, or have you had enough?
I think I've had enough.
That's okay. That's why we have Chaz Unleashed.
All right.
So guys, stick around, Peppers, because after Dave departs, we're going to have our little family announcement. Lucky the Lucky and I. And then we'll go to Chaz Unleashed for the policy time. Just a little 5-minute on the end. It won't be very long. Dave, thank you so much.
See you, everyone.
And we may or may not see you next week. We're still working out times.
That's right.
But whoever is here is definitely see you, Peppers. So we'll see you guys then. Until then, stay peppy. Hello there. How good was that sound effect? Every single week. Just another little change. Just it's evolution.
I can't wait to hear it personally.
I can't wait to hear what you come up with, Lockie. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. Okay, so here's a little family meeting.
Hello.
Hello, this is Lockie the Lucky. He's our producer. And there's a couple of things we want to talk about. First of all, we've received a number of comments in the the correspondence about the audio over the last 2 weeks. I totally want you to know, Lockie, that having done this for 3 years, I got exactly those comments. For 3 years. In fact, I only stopped getting those comments about 2 weeks before you started. And that was only because I was spending 12 hours of the
Perfect
time.
little sweet spot, that 2 weeks.
But yeah, we are Lockie, unlike me, knows what he's doing. And so we are making improvements every week, but we need to know what is wrong. So if you are on today's podcast, if you noticed any audio problems, like there was some things were soft or there's an echo or anything like that, can you please let us know? Tell us, just email us on
producer@pepthepodcast.com. And I am more than willing to have a chat about what's been an issue for you in the listening experience. We just want to make sure that this podcast continues to be high quality and high volume. I think we're going to be pushing 3 hours in today's episode. So let's make sure it's a good 3 hours as opposed to having 10 minutes here or there that doesn't quite hit the mark volume-wise, or in the case of apology to listeners who just listen to the podcast, because in PEP 181 we actually missed the last 10 seconds of audio somehow. So this will be the full episode and it'll all be one consistent volume.
And an apology to all the Peppers who listen to PEP because it's got such shit audio generally and they just hate themselves. I'm sorry, we're going to try and fix it. So apologies to you in advance. But
it's no longer a masochistic experience.
But email us or comments in the comments on YouTube or Facebook. But please give us details of the device you're listening on, like whether you're using headphones, are you listening on Spotify, are you watching on YouTube, just so we can, because different situations, are you listening on speakers? Different situations create different problems. And so we just to spot check it and fix it, we need to know those details.
Particularly if you're listening, the difference between Apple and Spotify or whatever app you're using there. Thank you.
Exactly. But that's not why we're here. The reason we're here is because we have an exciting announcement about something I don't understand. So over to you, Lucky.
Hello. We're fast forwarding from, I remember when you announced me on the podcast, we were joining the 20th century.
Yeah.
Now we're joining the 21st and the late 2010s. We are now having a PEP Discord. That is correct. Now, if you haven't heard of Discord before, it's essentially a type of online social media / forum platform where all of you Peppers can get together and create a little community of your own. Shortly after we announced the email address, a wonderful Pepper named Daniel reached out and wanted to create a PEP Discord space where other like-minded listeners can all join and converse and talk to each other about the latest episodes, about their thoughts on the election or the wandering audio quality. And now Daniel has wonderfully created this space where you guys can go to. There'll be a link in the description to join if you use Discord. If you don't use Discord, it's very simple. You can create an account and it'll be just like if you use Microsoft Teams or Slack or Skype, or there's a ton of other platforms like it, but Discord allows you to have that instant messaging as well as live streaming video and live calls with other listeners or other like-minded people.
Sounds scary. But Daniel has asked as well that he is volunteered to moderate it, which is nice.
Yes.
We're not going to be moderating it. It'll be fan run. But Daniel said if other people want to help moderate, just when you join the Discord, tell him and he'll happily take some help.
Yeah, really.
So and just want to emphasize, if you want to comment in the Discord, which I love the idea of this, I might not see it because I'm certainly not playing the moderator and I want it to be a fan space. So I'm not going to be putting a heavy thumb on that. And I don't know, it's up to you, Lockie, if you want to or not. But as far as I'm concerned, it's fan run. So if you want me to see something, put it in the comments underneath YouTube or Facebook because I will see them then. If you just want to have some nice chats with other fans, then put it in Discord or put in both. They can double up. It doesn't matter. That's fine. But I'm just saying, if you put something in Discord, don't assume I'm going to see it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put it underneath the YouTube, at least within the week, or Facebook, within the week of the video going up, I will see it when I scroll through for correspondence when I'm preparing the next podcast. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, you Peppers have created a wonderful community amongst yourselves already, and Daniel has just found another way where you guys can get a tiny bit even closer to each other. However, it's not going to be a way to get closer to Chaz. So continue producer at pepthepodcast.com. I got it right the second time. Or through the other methods of contacting for correspondence and whatnot.
I should say, I'll cruise through every now and then. I'll lurk.
A little Chazzy cameo.
Yeah, but just don't assume it. That's all. As you can assume, I'll see the YouTube and Facebook comments. Anyway, so let's see how that goes. Hopefully that will work for you guys. Anything else that we want to add? These are just the main things.
I'm hearing a little rumbling of what could be the music for. Is that Chaz Unleashed? I hear coming up.
Oh, I think it might be. Seeing the other side of the white flash. Cue sound effect.
Chaz Unleashed.
Welcome to the other side of the white flash and Chaz Unleashed. And it's been a real long time since we recorded a Chaz Unleashed in this room here. This is Dave's editing room, the Planet America editor. I've moved back here because Lockie is currently editing the rest of the pod next to my desk, and that's where I normally record, on my desk. And look, the man needs his space. He's just whipped up the most amazing Michigan tangent mashup I could possibly imagine. He's an artiste. He doesn't need me in the way, so here I am. I'm not going to lie, though. I am feeling unsettled in this room. I'm feeling like my energy is both unaligned and unpolarized. I think I'm going to need Brocky's box of rocks, but unfortunately, since I work at the ABC, I will never be able to afford them. But enough tomfoolery. Lockie tells me that we're cruising for about 3 hours, 10 minutes for this pod so far. So let's get into... What time is it? It's policy time. It's policy time. Now, we're talking about the policy that Kamala Harris announced a couple of days ago on The View, because this is 2024. That's where policy gets announced. Sunny Hostin was teed up with a absolute classic Dorothy Dixer here. For Americans listening to this podcast, a Dorothy Dixer is an Australian term for a fake question that draws a prearranged response. So it's like a setup question and you act like it's all spontaneous. This one did not come off as spontaneous at all, but here is the exchange.
This next issue is a personal one for me because I am part of what they call the sandwich generation. Yeah. I'm an only child, and I will likely be responsible for taking care of my children and my parents at the same time.
And us also.
And perhaps Joy, and my co-host. My mother, in fact, she's here in the audience, as I've told you. She's a retired teacher. Her application... Her application for long-term health care was denied because of a pre-existing health condition. You are announcing on our show a plan to ease the financial and emotional burdens on families like mine, caring for our aging loved ones. Yeah. What is that plan?
So, Sunny, like you, I took care of my mother when she was sick. She was diagnosed with cancer. And so it is a personal experience for me as well as something I care deeply about. You know, taking care of a parent, you know, that means trying to cook what they want to eat, what they can eat. It means picking out clothes for them that that's soft enough that it doesn't irritate their skin, right? It means trying to think of something funny to make them laugh or smile. And there's so much about that really is about giving folks dignity. And to your point about being in the sandwich generation, there are so many people in our country who are right in the middle. They're taking care of their kids and they're taking care of their aging parents. And it's just almost impossible to do it all, especially if they work. We're finding that so many are then having to leave their job, which means losing a source of income, not to mention the emotional stress. And so what I am proposing is that basically what we will do is allow Medicare to cover in-home health care. Right. So, and because we're talking about these kinds of things where it's just about helping an aging parent or person, you know, prepare a meal, you know, put their sweater on. And it's about dignity for that individual. It's about independence for that individual. I mean, people are of declining skills to some extent, but their dignity their pride has not declined. They want to stay in their home. They don't want to go somewhere else. Plus, for the family to send them to a residential care facility, to hire somebody is so expensive.
And wipes you out.
And I'll just say, well, but here's the other thing about it. So, you know, people say, well, how are you going to pay for it? Here's the thing. Here's how we pay for it. part of what I also intend to do is allow Medicare to continue to negotiate drug prices against these big pharmaceutical companies, which means we are going to save Medicare the money because we're not going to be paying these high prices, and those resources are best then put in a way that helps a family like the one you are describing.
Which you have already done.
Which
with
we
insulin,
have already
right.
done with insulin. So it can be done. It absolutely can be done. And it has to be about just seeing what's happening. And it's such a burden that's emotional, financial, physical. Care is about physical work.
Yes.
And helping people do what they rightly want and need to be able to do.
Okay, so Medicare would cover the cost of long-term care at home. Note, this does not pay for a nursing home facility. It only pays if you receive long-term care at home. Is it useful, this idea? Oh yeah, this is useful. Nearly 20% of seniors require some kind of help with bathing, eating, other daily life functions, according to the studies I've seen. And the older the seniors, the more of them require the help. Also, non-elderly people with disabilities require help. You don't want those people to have to live in a nursing home with a bunch of old people because they're young. You want them to be able to live their life in their house with just a little bit of help. In the short term, Medicare does cover at-home care right now, but only really in circumstances when a patient is recovering from an acute medical condition, like a short-term situation, like say recovering from a stroke, only for a very short time, like we're talking a few months. Right now, neither Medicare nor private health insurance covers long-run in-home care. None of them do. So if you want to stay at home and be cared for at home, you've got two choices. You pay for it yourself, number one. So if you want someone to assist you with basic daily tasks like dressing, eating, using the bathroom, your agencies are charging you about $30 an hour, which, you know, it's a lot for someone to have a few hours a day. According to Kaiser, in 2023, the median annual cost of care in the US was $62,000 for full-time homemaker services, $68,000 for full-time home health aide care, $116,000 for a private room in a nursing home, and $288,000 for round-the-clock home health aid services. So that's your option one. Pick one of them and pay for it yourself. Option two is get it paid for by Medicaid, which does currently pay for some at-home care. But Medicaid's for poor people. You only qualify for Medicaid if you are super poor. In some states, you need to be below the poverty line. In fact, well below the poverty line to qualify for Medicaid payments for this kind of stuff. Some states are particularly stingy. They create huge waiting lists and they usually force you eventually into a nursing home whether you like it or not. So that's the Medicaid situation. It's the cheapest, nastiest version of this policy. So people end up getting their family and friends to care for them for free. That's usually what happens. Now, it's free for the old person. It's not free for the family member who, as Kamala Harris just mentioned, will often have to downsize their job. They'd have to take a few days off or something like that. It costs them money and time. And that can be a huge burden for the old person's children, especially daughters. Like Kamala Harris made that point as well. This is something that's a real issue for women. The sandwich generation, as Harris likes to refer to it as, who have old parents and kids at the same time, both needing care, that's about a quarter of the population. So this is a big problem for a lot of Americans who happen to be the most productive Americans, the people in their 40s who are at the height of their skills and abilities, and they haven't started to go down the hill in terms of being old and losing energy, and they can still work hard. They're the most productive people, and they are being distracted from their labors by having to care for both kids and their parents. So this is economically a sensible thing to work on as well as morally. Now, in terms of polling, it's popular. It was interesting that Data for Progress, which is a left-leaning polling company, released a poll on a hypothetical proposal to expand Medicare to include coverage for long-term in-home care. They released that a couple of weeks ago. Interesting coincidence, that, don't you think? Huge coincidence. But leaving aside my cynicism, they found, just in time for this policy release, 88% support for this policy. And the numbers were similar for Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, although obviously as soon as it becomes a Democrat proposal, the Republicans are less likely to support it. So it will become a little bit more polarized, but 88% is a big number. You don't get many things more popular than 88%. Something like this was in actually the original Inflation Reduction Act. They tried to do this 2 years ago, but it got mentioned, like many things did in the original Inflation Reduction Act. The original policy under Biden would have expanded the Medicaid version of this and offered it to more people. So the cheap, nasty version I just told you before would the actual care would not be any less cheap or nasty, but it would be available to more people. So you wouldn't need to be in quite as destitute a condition to access these funds, even in red states. And that was budgeted to cost $150 billion over the decade, the Biden version. So this here is a much more expensive option, getting Medicare to pay for it and to pay for it for everyone, and a better standard care than you'd expect from Medicaid. So this is going to be a lot more expensive than $150 billion over the decade. How is this going to get paid for? Kamala Harris had contempt for people asking how this is going to get paid for. She'll say, we're going to deal with it with these drug price negotiations. We've been saving so much money with all the cheaper drugs that we're going to negotiate with Medicare, and we pass those savings onto this policy. Now, number one, I don't know how many times I've heard of that pool of money getting used in a Democrat spending concept. Honestly, I have no idea how many times. I can assure you it is many multiple times. That same pot of money, they go, wow, how are we going to pay for it? We'll use that pot of money from saving money on Medicare drugs. So I don't know if this is the only time Kamala Harris is suggesting she's going to use that money, or if she said she's going to use it for something else. I haven't gone over with a fine-tooth comb quite enough her policies too, and her pay-fors in particular, to see if she's doubled up there, but I'm suspicious. Leaving that aside, they do actually, in the fact sheet she put out, suggest some other funding mechanisms as well. I'd like some numbers, by the way, just saying we're going to do it vaguely. We'll get to that anyway. They suggest some other funding mechanisms, like, for instance, she says in the fact sheet they'll address Medicare fraud. They're always going to address Medicare fraud. I mean, if you haven't already saved money from addressing Medicare fraud, you haven't been trying hard enough, and I don't see why you would try any harder in the next term. They just always say that. It's just a classic. Waste, fraud, and abuse. That's where we're going to make our money. By the way, Trump does that more than anyone. All his policies are getting paid for by waste, fraud, and abuse, by removing waste, fraud, and abuse. Harris also says she's going to crack down on pharmaceutical benefit managers, which Melina told you about a few PEPs back, to increase transparency, disclose more information on costs, regulate other practices that raise prices. Seems like a bit of a 1%er to me as well. This is another thing they do say they're going to do all the time. I haven't seen the evidence so far. She also says she's going to implement international tax reform. Well, what does that mean? I'd be interested to know about that. I'd be interested to know the details and the numbers. But that is all we've heard. Literally, just, we will also implement international tax reform, end quote. Extremely vague. The fact sheet did flag that the program, though, would require some payments from families. This is important. This is where your funding comes from, your real funding. If people have to pay for it, they say on a sliding scale according to income. So if you're poor, you don't pay for it. If you're rich, you pay more for it than if you're middle class, but you pay a little bit for it. That sounds reasonable to me. The more you can afford it, the more you pay. The less you can afford it, the less you pay. That sounds reasonable. But the devil is in the details, of course. It wouldn't be hard to make it too expensive for the poor or not raise enough money from the rich. So I'd like to see those details, and they're not there. She also didn't say how much this would cost at all. She said, oh, we're going to pay for it with these vague practices and ideas, but she didn't say how much it would cost, which is a little bit sus. I know that whatever she budgets it at, it'll probably cost more, but she at least try. The Brookings Institution recently estimated that this kind of policy would cost about $40 billion a year. So that's going to end up with inflation, be well over $400 billion for the decade, which rings true given the Medicaid version was $150 billion. But once again, it'll probably cost more, but let's use that as the yardstick, $40 billion a year to begin with. Now, we should say it's possible it could save money in one respect, not completely save money, but caring for people at their home is definitely cheaper than caring for them in a nursing home. So you don't have to provide accommodation. You just need one staff member. That's it. And not there all the time, just there bits for a few hours a day. So that's much, much cheaper. So if it convinces people, if this policy convinces people to stay at home rather than go to a nursing home, that will make their care cheaper overall. But obviously it won't be cheaper as far as this program goes, because this program doesn't cover nursing homes at all. So the cost of someone going to a nursing home under this program is zero, because this program isn't paying for nursing homes. But overall care for the looking at it from a government perspective overall, so like where all the different programs are adding up, it will be cheaper to pay for them at home than to pay for them in a nursing home. So that's good. That's another economic plus. And this also, I should say in the same proposal, Harris says that she's going to also increase the wages of carers who, look, they are underpaid. They do need to get paid more. That's fair enough. But where's that money coming from? That's going to up the cost a lot. So where are the details? Okay, any concerns about this other than the financial ones, which I've already, no, it's just more financial ones. Look, Medicare is already about to take in way less money in taxes than it is putting out in benefits. That's when they call about Medicare going bankrupt. That's what they mean. It doesn't actually go bankrupt. We got a situation where already Medicare is paying out more than it takes in, and they're going to get to the point where even the bookkeeping trick, where supposedly the money that the government owes Medicare will be exhausted. The truth is that there is no money pot. So what's just happening is just Medicare is paying out more and more and more, and not having those extra payments being made up for by revenue, at least not enough. And the deficit in that Medicare is producing is greater and greater all the time. So if you can save Medicare some money through drug price negotiations, which is what the Democrats are doing, it's a shame to then immediately spend those savings on another program, which makes Medicare more expensive and more financially non-viable going forward, especially if you're going to use that same pot of money to spend on about 12 different programs. I don't want to be a broken record about this, but like when we first started PEP, before COVID, I used to go on about debt a lot. Then during the COVID period, the whole concerns about debt just took a holiday for a while, where there was zero interest rates and just printing money. But the debt days are back, I'm afraid. It's a huge problem. Medicare and Social Security are now costing $2.5 trillion a year, and the deficit just this last fiscal year was $1.8 trillion. It went up. Even in a great economy, when there's a great economy, the deficits should go down. That's economics 101. Usually, the deficits go up during a recession and down during a boom. The economy's going great, but the deficit's still going up. It went up $139 billion last fiscal year, and that's even though revenue went up a huge amount. Revenue went up 11%. It climbed from 4.4 trillion to 4.9 trillion, but the deficit still went up. Why is that? Is because the Biden's such a massive spendthrift? Well, look, he certainly spent some money, but that's not why. The reason why is because interest payments alone are almost $1 trillion now, and they're only getting worse. Have a look at this graph. If you're on the video, this is from Brian Riedel, the guy we spoke to on Planet America this week. Every year, those interest payments are going up by another $50 billion. And you watch, this is assuming the interest rates stay down. You watch what happens the next time there's a recession. And, the next time just before the recession, when interest rates rise. Because that's going to happen at some point in time. There's going to be another out of control boom. Interest rates are going to rise. And you know what's going to happen then? Those interest payments are going to go up as well. Then you're going to have your recession. Sorry, I need to get the order right. It's a serious problem. And so every time Medicare or Social Security become even more expensive, America really needs to focus on exactly how the extra cost is getting paid for. Now, I've talked enough about this, but I just want to emphasize this policy is a great policy from a healthcare point of view, and I'm not discouraging it. I'm just saying we really are getting to the point where people need to take seriously how they're going to pay for these things. You just can't put it on the credit card like we did during COVID. That's not going to cut it for much longer. And by the way, Harris is already moving on to the next healthcare benefit as part of the same policy in the same fact sheet. She proposed Medicare covering hearing and vision services because it doesn't at the moment. This was also first mooted under the Inflation Reduction Act. For hearing, Kamala Harris wants Medicare to cover hearing aids and exams for seniors, hearing exams for seniors. And for vision coverage, she wants to cover eye exams, new glasses, and lenses for seniors. And once again, perfectly reasonable policy. Of course, seniors shouldn't have to pay for that kind of stuff if they're supposed to have their medical needs supported by the state, which is what the whole concept of Medicare is meant to be. Over 90% of senior Medicare enrollees use eyeglasses. Nearly half of enrollees struggle with their hearing. So these reforms are needed, but once again, this is now even more money for a system which is already swallowing up the budget. What's Trump's response to all this? Well, the Trump campaign says that they've already supported this idea in their platform. Should we go and have a look at the relevant part of their platform? Chapter 6.4, protect care at home for the elderly. Republicans will shift resources back to at-home senior care, overturn disincentives that lead to care worker shortages, and support unpaid family caregivers through tax credits and reduced red tape. That was the direct quote from their platform. That is even vaguer. And it's not really this at all. It's just vaguely waving at this. I'm not giving them credit for this policy. And if they were serious about this, which they're clearly not, otherwise they'd spend more than 2 lines talking about it. They'd actually launch a policy. I'm not hearing how they're paying for it, which is and that's a much bigger problem with Trump, because Trump is Mr. Tax Cut. He's cutting taxes everywhere, tax breaks all over the place. Tariffs ain't going to raise this much money as much as he likes to pretend they are. So the Trump response is definitely not better, that's for sure. I prefer the lack of detail I'm seeing from Harris than I am from the even lacker of detail from Trump. So bottom line, we've got a very worthy policy here, in my view. I think it's morally great. I think it's socially very sensible. I think economically, broadly speaking, it's a great idea. It's just that, unfortunately, probably maybe not quite enough thought has been given to Mr. Accountant on this one. But, look, there are health policy ideas that cost less, like, for instance, Brocky's energy polarizer. Come on down. Yeah, magic rocks. Woo, let's go for it. But just before we go, that's what they call a callback. Just before we go, I just realized after we recorded the pod before that I left out the magic stat from PEP 80 that didn't pan out. At least it doesn't appear to be panning out. And I need to tell you about that as well, so you don't go telling everyone about it like I did. I told you all about it because it's not looking great. That stat was that, according to NPR, that's where I got it from, NPR, 80% of fertility care clinics in America are located in New York. It sounded strange, but they seemed to know what they were talking about. But now I should say, we don't know how they define fertility care clinics, which is the phrase they used. But Back Fife, our correspondent, notes that the CDC does list New York as only having 50 of about 500 IVF clinics, which was about the same as Texas, and California had more on 92. So to be honest, like that sounds like a much more reasonable number, that for New York to have 10% rather than 80%. Maybe it's all about the definitions of fertility care versus IVF. I don't know. But in the absence of further information, I'd probably defer to the CDC and let's junk that one. Let's just flush that one down the memory bank, shall we? But I just want to make sure that you guys knew about that because I don't want to leave you with wrongness. So anyway, enjoy Brocktober, folks. Good luck digging up your magic rocks, which are the cheapest, most effective form of healthcare in 2024, I believe. And in the meantime, I will see you next week. Till then, stay peppy.